I still remember that night like it's burned into the back of my eyes. My first midnight shift. My first real patrol. They'd just made me sheriff of Pine Hollow, a small town that never looked right after dark. Folks used to joke that nothing bad ever happens here, but that was a lie. Nothing bad happens, because people learned not to look too closely. That night, I was supposed to make rounds at the old cemetery off Highway 37. The place had been there longer than the town itself. An overgrown patch of land full of leaning gravestones and whispering pines. Most of the graves didn't even have names anymore, just dates too worn to read. The report said some kids had been sneaking in lately, lighting lanterns, drinking, maybe vandalizing headstones. Nothing serious, just kids being stupid. That's what I told myself. It was cold that night, the kind of cold that seeps through your coat and sits on your bones. The moon was thin and pale, hanging over the pines like an old nail. The highway was empty except for me. I remember passing mile marker 37, where the trees start to huddle close to the road, and the radio started crackling. Just static at first, then a low whisper, like someone mumbling words I couldn't quite catch. I turned it down, figuring it was interference. But even with the volume all the way down, I swear I still heard something under my breath. A man's voice, slow, careful, repeating something over and over. By the time I reached the gates of Pine Hollow Cemetery, the whisper had stopped. The iron gate was half open, swaying in the wind, creaking like it was breathing. I parked the cruiser and stepped out. The gravel crunched under my boots. My flashlight cut through the dark in a narrow beam, catching glints of marble and metal. The trees around the fence were thick, their branches tangled like hands. Somewhere far off, an owl called once. Then nothing. The silence felt heavy, like the air itself was waiting for something. I started walking the perimeter. The wind moved through the pines, slow and steady, almost rhythmic. Every few steps, I'd stop and listen. No kids, no laughter, just the sound of my own breathing. Then I saw it. Out near the middle of the graveyard, behind a cluster of tall stones, something flickered. A warm orange light, like a lantern flame. I froze. It shouldn't have been there. There were no lanterns, no groundskeeper. The cemetery had been abandoned for years. I called out, quiet at first, then louder. Sheriff's Department. Whoever's out there, you're trespassing! My voice carried, but the light didn't move. It just swayed gently, like someone holding it and listening. I took a few steps forward, crunching across the frost-covered grass. I told myself it was probably a prank, maybe one of the high schoolers. But deep down, I knew the light was too steady, too deliberate. The closer I got, the colder the air became. The beam of my flashlight dimmed a little, like the batteries were dying. I clicked it, shook it, but the light just flickered weakly. That's when I noticed something strange. Every time the wind passed through the pines, the lantern light bent with it, like it wasn't a reflection or a trick. It was real. But there was no sound, no footsteps, no voice. Just that slow, swaying glow. When I finally reached the spot, the light vanished. It didn't fade. It just blinked out. My flashlight flickered again, and for a split second I saw something standing near one of the headstones. A figure. Tall. Still. Dressed in what looked like an old coat. The kind men wore in the early 1900s. The face, if there was one, was hidden in shadow. I called out again, this time with my hand on my holster. "Sir, you okay out here?" No answer. The figure didn't move. I took a cautious step forward, then another. My boots sank into the damp earth. The air smelled like wet stone and rust. My breath came out in shaky clouds. Then the figure turned, not fast, not like in the movies. Just a slow rotation, as if it had been waiting for me to see it. I felt the hair on my neck stand up. I couldn't make out its face, but I swear the darkness where it should have been looked thicker than the night around it. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world felt stretched thin, like time was holding its breath. Then, just as quietly as it appeared, the figure stepped back and disappeared behind the gravestone. I ran to the spot. Nothing. No footprints. No light, no man, only the headstone. It was old and cracked down the middle. The inscription was nearly gone, except for a single line at the bottom. He keeps the watch when others sleep. I don't know why, but reading that sent a chill down my spine worse than the cold. I swept the area with my flashlight again, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, maybe a reflection off some metal, maybe fog, anything normal. But the cemetery was empty. I stayed out there another hour, walking the paths, checking every corner. No more lights, no figures, just that heavy stillness pressing down on me. When I finally got back in the cruiser, my hands were trembling. I didn't radio it in, didn't file a report. What would I even write? Saw a man in the graveyard who vanished into thin air? I told myself I was tired, seeing things. First night nerves. But as I pulled away from the gates, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw something that made my stomach drop. The gate. It wasn't open anymore. It was closed, and standing right in the middle of the road beyond it was that same faint lantern glow, just floating there. I pressed the gas, telling myself not to look back. But my eyes kept flicking to the mirror like I couldn't help it. The glow stayed there, a small point of orange in the black. Then, after a few seconds, it began to follow. Not fast, just keeping pace with my car moving along the side of the road. I drove faster. 90, maybe 100. My heart hammering so hard it hurt. The glow didn't fade. It just kept up mile after mile until I hit the town limits and the lights from Main Street broke through the trees. Then it was gone. No light. No figure. Nothing. When I got home that night, I sat in the driveway with the engine running. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I could still feel that cold clinging to me. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that faint orange flicker behind my eyelids. The next morning, I went back to the cemetery. In daylight, it looked harmless. Just old stones and weeds. No sign of the gate moving. No footprints. No lantern. But when I reached the headstone again, the one with the cracked face, there was something new lying in the grass at its base. An old brass lantern. The glass was blackened, like it had burned too long. Inside, the wick was still warm. I picked it up, and as I did, something shifted in the air around me. Not a sound, not exactly, but a feeling. Like the whole place had leaned in closer to listen. And then I heard it. That same whisper from the radio. Only this time it wasn't static. It was a voice, low, gravelly, coming from somewhere behind me. "Sheriff," it said. I turned around so fast I almost dropped the lantern, but the cemetery was empty. Just the pines swaying. The voice came again, closer now. "Keep the watch when others sleep." My knees almost gave out. I backed away, dropped the lantern, and stumbled to the car. I didn't look back. Not once. For days after, I kept thinking I'd dreamed it, that I'd let the stories get to me. But the lantern? It was still in the trunk of my car. I didn't remember putting it there, but there it was. Every night since, around midnight, my radio picks up that same static. And if I listen closely, I can still hear the voice underneath. Sometimes it says my name. Sometimes it just hums. But last night, it said something new. It said, "You're late." And when I looked out my window, I swear to God, there was a faint orange light moving along Highway 37. I didn't go back to Pine Hollow Cemetery for almost a week after that first patrol. Every night since then, my radio had been acting up, just faint static at first. Then on the third night, it started saying my name. At least, I thought it did. It would start as a low hum under the noise, then a drawn-out whisper, barely there, like someone breathing too close to the mic. "Sheriff, if..." That slow, dragging sound that made every hair on my neck stand up. I told myself it was interference, old frequencies bouncing off the hills. But even when the radio was off, I'd still hear that whisper. Not loud, not clear, just close. The station didn't believe me, of course. They laughed it off, said I was probably tired. But I wasn't tired. I was scared. By the end of the week, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know what was happening out there. So I went back. It was around midnight again, the same time as before. The highway was empty, stretching out like a black ribbon through the trees. When I turned down the dirt road leading to the cemetery, the world seemed to go quiet. My headlights lit up the rusted gate, and for a second, I thought I saw someone standing behind it, just a shadow, tall and still. But when I blinked, it was gone. I parked outside the gate and killed the engine. The air was heavy. No wind this time. Just silence. I grabbed my flashlight and pushed the gate open. The hinges groaned, long and low. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature dropped. The air felt thicker, almost damp, like the world was holding its breath. The graves stretched out in uneven rows, their stones crooked and chipped. Most of them dated back to the 1860s. Civil War soldiers, locals who never made it home. I'd grown up hearing stories about them, the men buried without names, the wives who left flowers that never wilted. But what caught my attention were the sounds. Soft, broken sounds. At first, I thought it was the wind again, but the night was still. The more I listened, the clearer it became. Faint voices, whispering just beyond the edge of the light. They weren't talking to each other. They were talking to me. I couldn't make out the words, but I heard my name. Over and over. Sometimes close, sometimes far. Like it was moving through the ground, I shined my light toward one of the older sections. There was a large stone cross leaning to one side, covered in moss. The whispers were strongest there. As I walked closer, the static from my radio crackled to life on its own. I hadn't touched it. The channel dial spun by itself, stopping on a dead frequency. Then, through the static, a voice came through, clear enough to make my stomach twist. "Sheriff." I froze. The voice was deep, drawn out, with an old southern drawl. I'd never heard it before, but something about it felt familiar. "Who is this?" I said into the mic. My voice shook. The static popped once. Then the voice came again. "You left the light." My hands went cold. The lantern. The one I'd found near the cracked headstone. It was still in the trunk of my car. "Who is this?" I asked again. No answer. Just a long, rasping breath that filled the radio. Then silence. I stood there staring at the stone cross. The air around it shimmered slightly, like heat rising off asphalt, even though the night was freezing. Something moved behind the graves, just a flicker, a shift in the dark. I turned, but my flashlight dimmed again, flickering weakly. The beam passed over the ground, and that's when I saw it. Footprints, fresh ones, deep in the dirt, leading away from the cross and toward the back of the cemetery. I followed them, even though every part of me screamed not to. The path curved through a patch of overgrown brush, and on the other side was a cluster of old graves with metal plaques instead of stones. The names had been eaten away by rust. The whispers were louder here. Dozens of them, tangled together, rising and falling like waves. They were saying words now, broken, jumbled sentences. "Cold ground. Keep the watch. Can't rest." I turned in a slow circle, trying to find where it was coming from. But there was no one there. The air was thick with the sound, and then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. Then my radio clicked again. "Sheriff," the voice said. But this time it wasn't coming from the radio. It was right behind me. I spun around, my flashlight shaking in my hand. There was nothing, just stones and shadows. But I could feel it. That same presence I'd felt before, watching, waiting. I started backing away, heart hammering in my chest. The beam of light swept across one of the plaques and something caught my eye. A name, barely readable under the rust. Isaac Monroe, 1864. I didn't know the name, but right below it, someone had carved a small line into the metal. Almost too faint to see. "He keeps the watch." The same words as the cracked headstone. My chest tightened. I felt dizzy. The wind picked up suddenly, cold and sharp. Then the radio came alive again, this time bursting with a wall of static so loud it hurt. Through it, that same voice shouted, clearer than before. "Keep the watch, Sheriff." I dropped the radio. The sound didn't stop. It filled the air around me, echoing between the stones. The ground beneath my boots began to tremble, just slightly. I looked down, and I swear I saw the dirt shift like something was moving underneath. That's when I ran. I don't remember reaching the gate. Don't remember starting the car. All I know is that when I finally hit the highway, the whispers were still in my ears, fading in and out like the sound of wind through a tunnel. Back at the station, I tried to play it off. I told myself it was stress, maybe hallucinations from lack of sleep. But the radio wouldn't stop. Every time I turned it off, it turned itself back on. Always the same voice, always saying my name. The next day, I went to check the old town records. There really was an Isaac Monroe, Confederate infantry, buried at Pine Hollow in 1864. The record said he died in the line of duty, but there was something strange about his file. The cause of death was listed as self-inflicted. No details, no notes. Just that. And under remarks, someone had handwritten, "Lantern bearer, watch never ended." I didn't sleep that night. Every time the wind passed by my window, I thought I heard whispering. When I closed my eyes, I saw the graves, the cross, the footprints. By the third night, I gave in and drove back to the cemetery. I don't know what I was looking for. Answers, maybe. Closure. But part of me knew I wasn't supposed to go back. The gate was already open. The air smelled like rain, though the sky was clear. As I stepped inside, the whispers started immediately. Not faint this time, loud, overlapping, like a crowd talking over itself. My heart was beating so hard it hurt. I walked straight toward the back, to where Isaac Monroe's plaque stood. The ground around it looked freshly disturbed, though no one had been there in years. I crouched down, ran my fingers over the metal. It was cold, too cold. Then, without thinking, I whispered, "What do you want from me?" For a second, nothing happened. Then the radio crackled from my belt. The voice came back. "Soft this time. Keep the watch." And right then, my flashlight flickered, and in its dying light, I saw a faint glow just beyond the graves. A lantern light, swaying slowly, the same one from before. But this time, it wasn't moving away. It was coming toward me. I didn't move. Couldn't. The light stopped a few feet in front of me, and for a moment, I saw a shape behind it. A man's silhouette. Old uniform, torn and faded. The brass buttons on his coat caught the light. He didn't speak. Didn't move. Just stood there, holding that lantern, as if waiting for me to take it. Then he lifted his free hand and pointed toward the graves. I followed his gesture, and that's when I saw it. A second lantern, resting on the ground beside an empty hole in the earth. My voice broke when I said it, but I couldn't stop myself. "I'm not him." The figure tilted its head slightly, like it was listening. Then, in a voice barely above a breath, it said, "You are now." The light went out, and the next thing I remember, I was standing alone in the dark, holding the lantern in my hand. I used to think courage meant standing your ground. Now I know. It's just another word for not knowing when to run. That night, the voice came back stronger than ever. The radio was off, but I could still hear it bleeding through the static, humming low through the speakers like something alive inside the wires. It said my name again, over and over. "Sheriff, keep the watch." No matter how loud I turned up the music, I couldn't drown it out. The sound wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from inside the cruiser. Inside me. By midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. The air felt thick, pressing down on my chest. So I did what I told myself I wouldn't do again. I drove back to Highway 37. The road was empty. The moon was just a sliver, like a blade cutting the sky open. And every mile I drove, I felt that same pressure build, like I was being pulled somewhere I didn't want to go. By the time I reached the cemetery gates, they were already open. Not swinging in the wind, just open. Waiting. I parked, stepped out, and the silence hit me. No crickets, no wind, even the pines were still. The kind of stillness that feels wrong. I left the engine running, headlights spilling across the gravel path. My breath came out in small white clouds. I didn't bring my gun this time, just the lantern I'd found that first night. It felt heavier now. The glass blackened even more, the brass eaten with rust. But when I touched the top, it was warm. Too warm. I walked through the gate. The air changed as soon as I stepped inside. The smell of pine was gone, replaced by something metallic. Iron. Old blood. The whispering started almost right away. Soft, layered, like a dozen voices talking from underground. I tried not to listen. I just followed the path, deeper and deeper, until the graves around me were no longer names I could read. The light from my lantern stretched ahead in thin lines across the stones. For a moment, I thought I saw something moving between them, something tall, drifting, like fog that had learned how to walk. Then I saw it, The other lantern. That faint, steady glow in the distance, orange and trembling. It was waiting in the same place as before, near the broken headstone. I don't know why, but my chest ached when I saw it, like I'd been expected. As I got closer, I saw the figure again. The same one, tall, motionless, wearing that old coat, the one that hung off his shoulders like it didn't quite belong to him anymore. But now, I could see his face, or what was left of it. There was skin, but it looked wrong. Too smooth, stretched tight over the bones, like wax that had melted and hardened again. The eyes were dark pits, no shine, no reflection, just black holes that seemed to pull the light inward. He stood there, holding the lantern in one hand, the flame inside barely moving. I raised mine without thinking, and for a second, the two lights flickered together, one orange, one pale yellow, like they were recognizing each other. That's when he spoke. "Sheriff," he said, voice low and hollow. It wasn't coming from his mouth. It came from everywhere around me, echoing through the trees, through the ground, through my chest. I wanted to run, but my legs didn't move. "I kept the watch," he said again. Each word dragged, like it was being forced out of something that didn't remember how to speak. "What are you?" I asked. My voice barely came out. The figure tilted his head slightly, the motion slow and stiff. "Keeper," he said. "Lantern keeper." The words hung in the air like smoke that wouldn't fade. I asked what he wanted, why he was haunting me. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took one slow step forward. The ground didn't crunch under his boots. There was no sound at all, just that steady glow growing brighter. When he stopped, the space between us was only a few feet. I could smell the lantern smoke, sharp, like burnt metal and wet earth. He lifted the lantern, holding it up beside his face. And for a second, I saw something inside it. Not a flame, a shape. It looked like a face, pressed against the glass from the inside, mouthing words I couldn't hear. I stumbled back, but the ground shifted beneath me. I looked down and saw that I wasn't standing on dirt anymore. It was ash. Soft, gray, endless ash. He stepped closer again, and the air began to hum, a deep, vibrating sound that rattled my teeth. "Keep the watch," he whispered. His voice was right behind my ear now. I turned, but he was still standing in front of me. The whisper didn't stop. Dozens of voices joined in, men, women, even children, all murmuring the same phrase. "Keep the watch. Keep the watch." The light from both lanterns began to spin, swirling like water. The graves around us started to glow faintly, one by one, until the entire cemetery was pulsing with that same dull orange light. I dropped my lantern. The glass shattered, but the flame didn't go out. It rolled across the ground like liquid fire, settling at the base of an unmarked grave. The whispers grew louder, faster. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. It was inside my head now, and then everything stopped. The figure was gone. The light was gone. The sound was gone. Just silence. I was on my knees, breathing hard, the broken lantern smoking beside me. When I looked up, there was something new in the place where the figure had stood. Another lantern. Old, rusted, identical to mine. But this one was still burning. The flame inside wasn't orange anymore. It was white, pure and blinding. I reached for it, though every part of me told me not to. When my hand touched the handle, a shock ran through me, cold at first, then burning hot. For a second, I saw something that didn't belong to this world. A field, endless, covered in fog. Rows and rows of people standing still, each holding a lantern that burned with that same white flame. Their faces were blank, empty, watching. And standing among them was him, the lantern keeper, walking between the rows, touching each lantern in turn, whispering to them. Then as quickly as it came, it was gone. I was back in the cemetery holding the lantern in my hand. The flame flickered once, then dimmed. That's when I noticed the writing scratched into the base of the metal. It wasn't etched neatly. It looked carved in desperation. When the light goes out, another must take it. The words made my stomach turn. I tried to drop the lantern, but my hand wouldn't open. My fingers had locked around the handle like it was part of me. The more I pulled, the hotter it got, until smoke started to rise from my skin. I screamed and finally threw it down. The light didn't break, didn't even flicker, and then it went out. The instant it did, the world around me changed. The graves disappeared, the trees, the air, the night. Everything was gone except for the dark, and in that dark, I heard footsteps, slow, dragging, coming closer. I didn't see him, but I could feel him, right behind me. The whisper brushed against the back of my neck. "Keep it!" A sudden heat burst from the ground. The lantern reignited on its own, and that pale white light washed over everything. I was alone again. The cemetery was back. The trees were still. The wind had returned. But when I looked down at the lantern, I saw something inside the flame, a reflection. My reflection, only it wasn't me. The face staring back had no eyes. I don't remember driving home. I just remember waking up in my bed hours later, clothes still covered in dirt and ash. The lantern was sitting on my dresser, still burning. Every night since, it hasn't gone out. No matter how hard I try to cover it, drown it, bury it, it burns. And when I drive past Highway 37 now, there's always someone standing on the shoulder, tall, still, lantern in hand, watching. Sometimes I see the light flicker. Sometimes I hear my name, but last night was different. The lantern in my room went dim for the first time. And when it did, the radio in my cruiser came alive on its own. The voice was faint, but I heard it clear as day. "Sheriff, it's your turn. They told me it was just kids. Teenagers sneaking into Pine Hollow Cemetery again, digging around for a scare." That's what the dispatcher said when the first call came in. But she didn't hear the tremor in the groundskeeper's voice when he called it in, how he kept saying the same thing over and over. "They're open," he said. "The graves? They're open." I'd been on patrol most of that evening, cutting down Highway 37 with the same old static humming in my cruiser. The town was asleep, quiet like it always was after 9, the kind of quiet that presses against your skull. When the call came through, I turned the car around without thinking. I didn't need directions. I'd been to Pine Hollow too many times already. Something about that place always pulled me back. It was past midnight when I reached the gates. The fog was thick, rolling in from the woods, curling around the iron bars like it had a mind of its own. The groundskeeper's truck sat just outside the fence. His door was open, keys still dangling. The headlights were on, pointing straight into the dark rows of tombstones. I called out for him. "Tom, that you?" But nothing answered except the echo of my own voice. The air smelled like wet earth and something else. Something sour. When I stepped through the gates, the gravel crunched beneath my boots. The fog swallowed everything past the first row of stones. My flashlight beam felt useless against it. I'd only taken a few steps when I saw the first grave. It was near the old elm tree, one of the oldest plots in Pine Hollow. The ground had been torn open. Not shoveled, torn. The dirt was scattered in wide arcs, as if something had exploded from underneath. The coffin sat half exposed in the hole. Its lid was split in two, splinters jutting out like broken ribs. I leaned over it, expecting to see bones or a casket full of nothing but rot. But there was something else inside. Long, deep scratches ran across the wood from the inside out. 5 of them, each one uneven, desperate. I stared at them for a long time, my breath hanging in the cold air. I'd seen grave robbers before, even animal burrows, but this wasn't that. These marks came from within. I shined my light closer. The claw grooves were lined with something dark, dried brown, flaking away like rust. I told myself it was old wood stain. It wasn't. The nameplate on the coffin read, Eleanor West, 1902-1931. Her grave had been sealed for nearly a century. My radio crackled on my belt. For a second, I thought it was the station calling, but when I lifted it, there was nothing but static. And under it, faintly a low breath, I froze. "Tom?" I said into it. The breath stopped. Then came a voice, quiet and broken. "Don't let them close it." The radio went dead, my throat went dry. The fog thickened around me, swirling low across the graves like smoke from an unseen fire. I backed away from the open pit, and swept my flashlight across the rows. That's when I saw the others, 3 more graves, all dug up. All the same way, dirt thrown out from below, coffins cracked open like eggshells. I don't know how long I stood there, just listening. There was a faint sound under the earth, a shifting, scraping sound, like something dragging wood against stone. I forced myself to move toward the next grave. The nameplate on that one was newer. Thomas Keller, 1985-2012. That name hit me. The groundskeeper. My pulse started to pound in my ears. I knelt down, shining the light over the coffin. It was empty, no body, no clothes, nothing. But the inside of the lid was shredded. The same claw marks, the same streaks of dried brown. There were fingerprints on the edge, pressed into the wood so hard that splinters had embedded in them. I stepped back. My hands were shaking. I tried to radio dispatch, but the channel wouldn't open, just static. Then the smell hit me again, stronger this time, like rot, like soil that had been wet too long. And through the fog, I saw movement. Something low to the ground, crawling between the graves. The beam of my flashlight caught it for just a moment. Gray skin stretched thin over a face that looked almost human. The eyes were open wide, unfocused, milky white. It stopped when it saw the light, its head jerking in small, twitching motions. I couldn't breathe. Then slowly it sank back into the earth, like it belonged there. The soil rippled as it disappeared. I ran. I don't even remember crossing back through the gates. When I reached my cruiser, my hands were covered in dirt. The keys slipped twice before I got the engine started. As I pulled away, I caught something in the rearview mirror. The graves, every one of them, looked open now, rows and rows of black holes in the ground, and in the mist above them, I thought I saw faces, just faintly, eyes reflecting the headlights, watching. When I made it back to the station, the deputy on duty said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I didn't tell him he was half right. I wrote up the report. Grave disturbance. Possible vandalism. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking long enough to type it clean. That night, when I finally got home, I couldn't sleep. My head kept replaying that sound, the scraping from under the earth. Around 3 in the morning, I heard something at my window. Just a soft tap, once. Then again, I got up, looked outside. Nothing there. But when I checked the glass, there were marks on it. 5 of them. Uneven. Clawed. I called the cemetery the next morning, tried to get someone out there. The line just rang. By noon, the sheriff's office got another call. A neighbor who lived near Pine Hollow said he saw someone standing by the fence at dawn. Said it looked like Tom Keller. The deputy told him that couldn't be right, because Tom Keller had been buried for 12 years. I went back out there myself that afternoon. The fog had cleared, the sun finally out. The place looked different, calmer, but the graves, they were filled back in, every one of them. Neat. Perfect. Like nothing had ever been disturbed. The dirt didn't look new either. It was hard packed, grass already growing over it. But something was wrong. When I walked through, the air felt strange, heavier, muffled, like the world was listening. And in the silence, I thought I heard breathing again. Slow, steady, coming from the ground beneath me. I stopped near Tom's grave. The stone was clean now, polished even. The name glared up at me in sunlight. Someone had left flowers, fresh ones. I crouched down to look closer. That's when I saw the corner of something sticking out of the dirt, a piece of wood, the same kind as the coffin lids, and carved into it, deep and rough, were 3 words. Still not dead. I don't remember dropping the flashlight, but I heard it hit the dirt beside me. I backed up, staring at that little scrap of wood, until I realized something else, something I still can't explain. Every headstone in that row had been moved slightly, tilted just enough to face the same direction, toward the gate, toward me. The air shifted, carrying a smell I knew too well now, that wet, sour earth. And underneath it, something faint, a whisper. It came from below the ground, my name. I turned and left the cemetery without looking back. I don't think I could have if I tried. That night I locked every door, every window, left the lights on, but I still heard it, That same scraping sound. Underneath the floorboards this time. Slow, careful, like something was digging its way up. I sat in the dark until dawn, listening, waiting. When the sound finally stopped, I thought it was over. I thought maybe I'd imagined it. But when I went outside that morning, I found dirt scattered across the porch steps, and on the top one, 5 long scratches, deep, uneven, like someone trying to climb out. The smell hit me before I even opened the gates. I'd know that smell anywhere now. Wet earth and rot, mixed with something sweet and wrong, like fruit left too long in the sun. It clung to the air, heavy enough that I could almost taste it. I'd been driving to Pine Hollow every night since that first discovery. It wasn't my shift anymore, wasn't even my assignment, but I couldn't stay away. The report I filed about the open graves had been buried under paperwork and excuses. Vandalism, they said. Wind, erosion, maybe coyotes. But none of them had seen those claw marks. None of them had heard the voice whispering through the static. Tonight, when I parked by the fence, I noticed something strange. The fog was gone. No mist, no haze. The air was clear, cold, too still. The groundskeeper's truck was still there, right where it had been the night Tom disappeared. Rust blooming on the doors, grass starting to grow around the tires. It hadn't been moved once. When I stepped into the graveyard, the smell grew stronger. It wasn't coming from any one place. It was everywhere. Like the ground itself was bleeding something invisible. I clicked on my flashlight and swept the beam over the rows. That's when I saw it. 6 graves, all disturbed again. But this time, the dirt wasn't thrown out like before. It was neatly piled. Almost... Careful, I walked closer. My boots sank deep in the soft soil. The closer I got, the more the stench wrapped around me, crawling up my throat until I gagged. The first grave I looked into stopped me cold. The coffin was open, but the body wasn't gone. It was rearranged. The bones, clean, dry bones, had been pulled apart and set in a circle inside the coffin. Perfectly arranged, almost like some ritual pattern. The skull sat in the middle, facing upward. Its jaw had been pried open. I whispered, "What the hell?" The next grave was the same. So was the one after that. Each coffin had been opened, the body inside taken apart and positioned differently. Some bones were missing, others placed in strange, unnatural poses. Hands folded over the ribs, legs crossed, faces turned to the side. But none of them had been stolen. Not one body missing, just changed. By the time I reached the 5th grave, I couldn't ignore what I was seeing. Every coffin looked as if someone, or something, had been trying to put the bodies back together, but wrong. Like it didn't remember how humans were supposed to look. The smell was unbearable. I tied a cloth around my nose, but it didn't help. It wasn't just rot anymore. It was sharper now. Chemical, almost metallic. I crouched near one of the graves, shining my light along the dirt. The soil looked darker than usual, like it had soaked something in. There were small holes around the edges, narrow, deep, like something had been burrowing through from below. When I pressed the dirt with my hand, it was warm. That's when I heard it again. A faint sound somewhere behind me. A shift of earth. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The sound came again. Scrape. Drag. Scrape. Something was moving under the ground. I backed up fast, sweeping my flashlight in every direction. The graves stretched into the dark, hundreds of them. Too many to watch at once. I heard another sound. This time, closer. A low, wet crack, like a root snapping under strain. Then silence. The earth around one of the graves began to sink, just a little, as if something was pressing up from underneath. I stepped back, my voice shaking. "If anyone's out here, you need to stop." No answer. Just the smell of rot and the faintest tremor in the ground. I raised my radio. "This is Sheriff Dalton, Pine Hollow Cemetery. We've got more disturbed graves. Send a unit." Static, I tapped it again. "Hello? Dispatch, do you read?" The static grew louder, hissing like breath. Then faintly something underneath it. A whisper. It said my name once. Then again. "Dalton." I dropped the radio. The sound cut out the second it hit the dirt. I bent to grab it, but something else caught my eye. On the ground beside me, just at the edge of the beam, were fresh footprints, bare feet. Deep impressions, the toes splayed, the dirt pressed wet and heavy like they'd just been made. They led away from the graves, and then stopped, right where I was standing. I moved the flashlight slowly up the path, but the beam caught nothing. Nothing standing there. Nothing at all. Still, I could feel it. That pressure again. Like the air around me had changed. Like I wasn't alone. I don't know why I did it, but I crouched again and touched one of the footprints. It was warm, almost hot. The dirt around it vibrated faintly under my fingertips, like something alive was breathing below. And then the smell shifted. No longer rot. No longer sweet decay. It smelled like soil that had been turned over 1,000 times. Old, dense, filled with the weight of everything buried in it. Something about it made me dizzy. I stumbled back, gripping my knees, trying to steady myself. That's when I noticed something glinting inside one of the open coffins. I leaned in, aiming my light inside. At the bottom of the wooden box, carved deep into the grain, were words. The letters uneven, scratched by hand or claw, let us breathe. The air left my lungs. I backed away, shaking my head, whispering, "No, no, no." But the sound came again, a faint rustle of dirt. All around me this time. Every grave. Every open hole. Tiny movements, soft and steady like hundreds of small things crawling just beneath the surface. I turned and ran. The smell followed me, thick and heavy. It clung to my clothes, my skin, even as I reached the gate. When I looked back, I saw movement across the rows, small rises of earth. Dozens of them lifting in waves, and in the beam of my dying flashlight, I caught a glimpse of something. Hands. Gray and brittle, breaking through the soil. Not reaching out, not attacking, just trembling, almost like they were gasping, like the bodies below had forgotten how to breathe and were trying to remember. I made it to my cruiser and sat there with my hand on the ignition. Staring at the graveyard, every part of me wanted to drive away, but I couldn't. Not yet. I kept staring until I noticed something else. The fog had started to roll back in, but it wasn't coming from the woods this time. It was seeping up from the ground. Thin wisps of white smoke rising from each disturbed grave. Twisting together, drifting toward the fence line. When one of the streams reached my windshield, it smeared the glass with a faint residue, like ash, and written in that haze, just for a second before it vanished, were 3 words. Still not done. I drove off fast, heart racing, eyes locked on the mirror the whole way back to town. But even as the cemetery disappeared behind me, the smell didn't. It followed. It was in my clothes, my hands, the back seat. When I got home, I stripped everything off and showered, scrubbing until my skin turned red. But no matter how hard I tried, the smell stayed. That thick, clinging scent of soil and something rotten underneath. When I went to bed, I thought I heard something in the walls. Faint, rhythmic, like dirt being pushed aside. I pressed my ear against the plaster, holding my breath. There it was again, soft, steady, like a hand dragging through soil. And just when I started to pull away, I heard it whisper, low, muffled, from somewhere deep within the wall, "Let us breathe." I don't remember moving. I don't remember the night ending, but in the morning, I found dirt under my nails. And across the floor, leading from my bed to the window, a trail of footprints, bare, wet, and smelling like Pine Hollow. I don't know how long I've been coming to Pine Hollow. Nights bleed into each other. Days don't matter. I know that now. The town doesn't notice what happens here. They go about their lives like the graves are safe, like nothing is wrong. But every night, something wakes beneath the earth, and it reminds me I'm lying. It was past midnight again. I parked at the edge of the cemetery. The gates were open. No creak, no wind, just still. The smell hit me before I even stepped out of the car. Wet earth, rot, decay, and something else. Something metallic, sharp. I gripped the flashlight tighter. The beam barely cut through the darkness. The fog hadn't rolled in yet. Tonight, I could see the rows of graves clearly, and that was worse than the mist. Clear meant I could see the dirt moving. I froze, It wasn't a trick of the light, not my mind playing games. The soil in front of me shifted, just a little at first, tiny rises and dips like something crawling below. Then it began to undulate, wave-like. Long, rolling movements spreading across the graveyard. I stumbled back. My heart was pounding. My hands shook so badly the flashlight wobbled, casting frantic shadows across the stones. "What the hell is happening?" I whispered to myself. The ground in front of me started to form ridges, little mounds lifting higher, then sinking. I took another step back and I realized I wasn't hearing anything. Not crunching, not scraping. Just the sight of dirt moving as if it were alive. I shined the flashlight across the other graves. Every single one in that row, the ones that had been dug up before, was trembling. Small ripples of soil rolling toward me. It felt like the earth itself was breathing, slow, deliberate, and angry. Then came the smell. Stronger now, so sharp I gagged. Rotten soil mixed with metal sweat, something acidic I couldn't name. I clutched my cloth over my nose, but it didn't help. The air was thick, heavy, impossible to ignore. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination. Stress. Too many nights awake. Maybe even some kind of gas rising from the ground. Rational explanations. I told myself that. Over and over. But rational doesn't explain what I saw next. The soil on one of the oldest graves, the cracked headstone near the elm tree, began to heave violently. Not just a ripple. A mound pushed upward, tilting the stone itself slightly. I froze, gripping the flashlight until my knuckles hurt. I whispered, "Stop! Stop!" Nothing stopped. The dirt continued to rise, curling like hands trying to break the surface. And then I saw it. Fingers. Not real fingers. Gray, elongated, claw-like. The tips piercing the soil, moving, reaching. The ground cracked as if it had been shattered from below. I stumbled back, almost falling over. My breath came in short, painful gasps. Then the next grave did the same, and the one after that. Each disturbed coffin erupted from the earth slowly, carefully, as if whatever was beneath was testing the surface, trying to feel its way out. I ran a few steps, heart hammering, and stopped. My flashlight caught movement beneath the freshly filled graves. Soil rolling, rising, forming shapes like knuckles breaking through mud. The whispers started again. Low, almost inaudible at first. Words I couldn't make out. Just a rhythm of breath in the faintest syllables. Sheriff, Dalton. I dropped to my knees, clutching my ears, but it was inside me now. A vibration. A pulse in the ground, through my feet, my bones. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. The largest mound near the elm tree shifted violently. I fell backward onto the frost-covered grass. The dirt cracked open, and I saw movement under the surface. A face. Gray, wet, shiny in the weak moonlight. No eyes, just hollow pits. Jaw slack, hairless. The skin stretched too tight over the skull. It pressed against the inside of the earth like it wanted out but couldn't. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was being squeezed by the weight of the night itself. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, it withdrew. The soil closed over it like nothing had happened. I could hear nothing, see nothing, only the fog beginning to curl around the graves, creeping toward me like fingers. I scrambled backward, tripping over roots and frost. My flashlight bounced wildly, casting shadows across the leaning stones. I saw more shapes just under the surface, limbs, faces, hands, none human, none right, and they were all reaching. Something inside me broke then. Fear, maybe, or disbelief. I turned and ran. My boots sank into the soft earth, falling into holes that hadn't been there moments ago. Every step I took, the earth seemed to chase me. Small mounds sprouted where I had been. Fingers, claws, shapes I couldn't name, reaching for me. When I reached the gate, I dared a glance behind me. The graveyard was moving, not like wind through trees, not like fog. Every row of disturbed graves wriggled in wave-like motions, rising and falling like a living thing. And then, from somewhere deep, came a sound. Not a voice, not a growl, not even a whisper. A low, wet, tearing sound. It echoed through the rows of tombstones. I pressed the flashlight to the gate, trying to calm my shaking hands. That's when I realized Where the footprints had been, the dirt had returned, smooth, undisturbed, but the air was still thick, still heavy, still smelling of rot. I got into the cruiser, started the engine, and for a moment, I thought I was safe. Then the ground under the headlights shifted. Just at the edge of the beam, a mound rose again. Slowly, purposefully, I slammed the accelerator. The light retreated into the distance behind me, but the smell followed. It clung to the cabin, the seat, my clothes. I drove in silence until the highway lights broke the dark. Only then did I notice my hands were covered in soil, wet, black, clinging to my skin. At home, I scrubbed and scrubbed, but the dirt refused to leave, and the whispers, they didn't stop. Through the walls, through the floorboards, in my head, faintly, endlessly. Sheriff. Dalton, we want out. I tried to sleep. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw the earth writhing, rising, bodies moving beneath the soil. Clawed hands, hollow faces, mouths pressing up to the surface. When I opened my eyes, my room smelled of wet rot. I haven't gone back to the cemetery since that night. I don't think I can. Not yet, but sometimes, when I walk past the graveyard, when the wind is just right and the fog curls low over the fence, I see it. The ground ripples. Slow, deliberate, watching, waiting, and I know something is moving below, waiting for the night to finish its work. And one day, I'm afraid it will be ready to come out. It was the third night I couldn't sleep. The smell of soil and rot lingered in the corners of my bedroom. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the graves moving, saw the claw marks, the twisted bones, the hands reaching from beneath the dirt. I told myself I was imagining it. I had to. There was no other explanation, and yet I knew I had to go back. I drove out to Pine Hollow Cemetery just after midnight. The fog rolled in fast, thick and white, curling around the headstones like fingers. The wind was cold, sharp, and the trees moaned under its weight. I parked near the old elm tree, flashlight and radio in hand. My pulse was pounding. Every instinct screamed at me not to go in, not to look, not to see. But something in me, call it fear, call it curiosity, kept me moving forward. The path was familiar, but tonight it looked different, ominous, watching. The disturbed graves from before were all still open. The dirt piled neatly at the sides. I stared at them, stomach turning. I moved past them, flashlight sweeping over the rows. And then I saw it. My blood ran cold. A single grave, freshly dug. The dirt dark and wet, the mound higher than the others. The headstone leaned slightly forward. Something about it made the hair on my neck stand on end. I walked closer. The headstone was small, new, polished, and carved deep into the marble were words I could not have imagined. Sheriff Dalton, 1980. The bottom half of the date wasn't filled in. It was left blank. My name, my years of life, only beginning. I staggered back, flashlight trembling in my hand. I tried to make sense of it. Someone must have carved it as a sick joke, but no one could have known. No one could have carved this at the exact same time I was alive, awake, seeing it. The smell hit me first, the strongest yet. Earth, decay, and something metallic. I gagged and took a step back. The ground under my feet felt soft, almost spongy. My boots sank a little into it. I knelt at the edge of the grave, shining my light into the open pit. The soil had been freshly turned, and the darkness inside seemed thicker than the night itself. I could feel a pulse coming from it, subtle at first, then stronger. The dirt rippled, slowly, rising in the middle of the grave. I froze. My hands gripped the flashlight so tightly I thought I'd crush it. Something moved beneath the surface. A shape. Something large, undefined, pressing up from under the earth. It pushed the soil outward like a tide. The smell of rot and wet metal grew stronger, stinging my eyes. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. I was glued to the spot. The mound quivered, and then it split. I swear I saw it. The shape of a hand, gray and thin, pushing through the soil. Fingers long and warped, like tree roots twisted wrong. The hand trembled as it emerged, digging into the dirt for leverage. I stumbled back, my flashlight bouncing wildly. More hands followed, smaller, twitching. Faces, pressed against the soil from below, pressed upward. Their mouths opened in silent screams. Their eyes, empty black pits, stared at me. I gagged. "Stop! Stop!" I whispered, but it was useless. The earth shook. The hands clawed at the sides of the grave, and then silence. The mound collapsed. The hands disappeared beneath the dirt. The smell remained. I could still feel the pulse in the earth, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat beneath the grave. I backed away slowly, my flashlight sweeping across the cemetery. Every previously disturbed grave was now moving slightly, small ripples in the soil, as if whatever was under there was waking, waiting. And then I noticed something else. Footprints. Fresh footprints in the wet dirt, leading from the new grave toward the back of the cemetery. Bare feet, small, thin, pressed deep into the soil. I followed them, my pulse hammering, stomach twisting. The fog curled around me, thickening as I moved closer to the back row of graves. At the far edge, I saw another headstone, old and cracked, but there was something unusual about it. The dirt around it had been dug up, hollowed, and inside the pit, I could see the soil moving again. A low, wet, rasping sound came from the grave. The whisper followed. "Sheriff." "Dalton." I froze. The voice was inside my head now. Not coming from the grave, not coming from the radio, not coming from the air. Inside my skull, shivering inside my brain. I backed away, tripping over roots, over frost, over my own feet. The whisper continued, repeating, dragging out my name. I reached the path, but when I looked back, the new grave was no longer just dirt and stone. The mound had shifted again. The soil formed the outline of a body. My body. The air grew heavier. The fog thickened around the grave. It smelled like the graveyard itself had rotted inside out. The hands rose again, gray and twisted, clawing through the soil. But this time the shapes were different. Taller, sharper, almost human, but wrong. "Not mine, not anyone's I had ever seen," I screamed. My flashlight skittered across the ground, catching glimpses of faces beneath the dirt. Hollow eyes, open mouths, pressed against the soil, pushing upward, and then I saw it. A figure rising, not fully formed but humanoid. Gray skin stretched tight over what seemed like bones, face melted and waxen. A lantern appeared in its hand. Small, rusted, burning with pale light. The flame flickered but never went out. It stopped at the edge of the new grave, staring down at the soil that bore my name. I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The lantern light grew brighter, illuminating the trembling graves behind it. The whispers became louder, overlapping, chanting, "Keep the watch! Keep the watch!" I fell to my knees, gripping the cold ground, my hands coated in wet dirt, and then it spoke, a hollow, rasping voice that seemed to come from the lantern, from the soil, from every direction at once. "You belong here." I shook my head. I couldn't, not me. But the hands in the soil reached toward me, rising from graves I hadn't even noticed, fingers clawing, grasping. Faces pressed upward, mouths opening silently. I scrambled back, my hands in the wet dirt, slipping, sinking into the soil. The pulse beneath the graves quickened. Faster, stronger, alive. A heartbeat not mine, but demanding mine. The figure raised the lantern higher. The pale flame flickered over the open grave with my name on it. The soil heaved violently. And for a moment I thought I saw something moving inside, something like me, twisted, gray, pressing against the dirt to get out. I stumbled backward, tripping over my flashlight. It shattered, sending shards across the wet earth. The lantern's light reflected off the broken glass, flickering across the graves, and I saw the eyes. Hundreds of eyes, black and hollow, watching, waiting. I ran. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. My boots sank in the soft soil, wet and cold, dragging me down. The fog swallowed the path, curling around me, tugging at my clothes. I reached the gate, yanking it open. The figure did not follow, but the whispers did. Even now, hours later, I can hear them. In my car, in my house, under my skin. And I know it's only a matter of time before the grave calls again, because my name is there, carved in stone, freshly dug, waiting. And I am not ready It started with a call I almost didn't take seriously. The dispatcher's voice sounded tired, distant, like she'd been reading reports for hours. But there was something in her tone that made me pause. "Sheriff," she said slowly, "we've got reports of crying. Female voice. Late at night, Cedar Hill Cemetery. Cedar Hill. That place had always given me the creeps. Rolling hills, gnarled oaks, stones leaning in ways they shouldn't. People said it was quiet, serene. I never found it peaceful." I rubbed my eyes and muttered, "Crying? In the cemetery?" "Yes," she said. "Several calls. She's sobbing. Locals say it's near the children's section. They won't get close." I sighed and grabbed my flashlight. My cruiser's engine roared to life, echoing across the empty streets of Cedar Hill. The radio was dead silent. No static, no hum, just the distant echo of my own thoughts. By the time I reached the gates, it was just past midnight. Fog curled around the headstones like thin fingers. The oak trees swayed without wind, their branches creaking like old bones. I stepped out, boots crunching on gravel. The smell of damp earth was thick. Fresh soil, decayed leaves, something faintly metallic under it all. At first it was quiet, too quiet. And then I heard it. Soft at first, almost too faint to register. A sob, then another. Long, drawn-out shattering. It was human. My heart thumped hard. Not just from the sound, but from something deep in me that I didn't want to acknowledge. Fear? Maybe. Or recognition. I followed it slowly, flashlight sweeping over crooked headstones, past marble angels and chipped statues. The sobbing grew louder, more desperate. It led me to the children's section. Small graves, tiny markers, flowers wilted from neglect. The sobbing came from the far corner where the moon barely touched the ground. I paused, held my breath. The voice was faint, crying, gasping. I couldn't make out words. "Just sorrow, endless sorrow," I called out softly. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The crying stopped for a moment. A sharp intake of breath like the sound itself had been cut. Then it started again. Louder this time, desperate, heart-wrenching. I moved closer, stepping carefully over uneven dirt and tangled roots. The air grew colder with each step, prickling my skin. My flashlight flickered, and then I saw her. Not a woman. Not exactly. Just a shape, sitting on the ground between two graves. Long hair, dark and stringy, hanging over her face. Shaking, shoulders quivering. The sound came in ragged bursts, like her chest was trying to force out something it couldn't hold. "Ma'am," I said again. She didn't respond. Just continued to weep, rocking slightly. The sound filled the air, thickening it, making my stomach twist. I stepped closer. That's when I noticed her hands. Pale, dirty, fingers clutching at her lap, nails cracked. And the more I looked, the more I realized. Her feet weren't touching the ground. They hovered just above it, twitching, dangling. I froze. My voice caught in my throat. Who are you?" The crying stopped abruptly. Silence pressed down like a weight. The fog shifted, curling around the graves, obscuring the edges of my vision. Then I heard it. Whispering. Faint. Just behind me. "My name, Sheriff Dalton." I spun around, flashlight slicing through the fog. Nothing. Just the crooked stones and the oak trees. But the cold. It had intensified. My breath came out in short clouds. I turned back toward her. She hadn't moved, but the shadows around her had deepened. Something about the way the light fell made her hair seem to float, almost moving on its own. I swallowed hard. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The sobbing started again, but now there was a rhythm, a pattern, not natural crying. Each sob ended with a pause, almost like she was trying to speak but couldn't. I stepped closer, and then I saw it, her eyes. Pale, almost white in the darkness, reflecting the flashlight. Hollow, yet filled with grief so intense it made my chest ache. I stumbled back, hand over my mouth. The voice whispered again, but this time it was clearer. Not through the air, but in my head. "Don't leave. Don't leave us." I froze, the words echoing like they'd been carved into my skull. My knees felt weak. My heart thudded in my ears. I tried to step forward, but the ground seemed to shift beneath me. The dirt around the graves trembled. small rolling movements, as if the earth itself was alive. The crying grew louder, more insistent. The shape raised its head. I saw the face, pale, drawn, lips cracked and trembling. Tears streaked down her cheeks, but there was no warmth in them. No life. Then her mouth moved. No sound came out, but the sobbing continued, faster, sharper. I stumbled back again. My flashlight fell, spinning across the ground. Its beam caught glimpses of the surrounding graves. I swear I saw small shapes writhing just under the surface. Limbs, hands, faces, pressing against the soil. Trying to reach out, I scrambled for my radio. "Dispatch, I need backup at Cedar Hill Cemetery. Now! Static!" Nothing else. The crying stopped. The fog thickened. I was alone, but not alone. Every nerve in my body screamed at me. The air vibrated, heavy and wet. Then the shape moved. Slowly. Levitation. Floating toward the row of graves, hair flowing like it had a mind of its own. The eyes remained fixed on me. Empty, unblinking, I stumbled backward, tripping over roots. My boots sank into damp soil. And then I heard something new, a low scratching. Soft, deliberate, from the dirt near the children's graves. I pressed my hands to my ears, but the sound drilled through, rattling my teeth. "Sheriff? Dalton, help!" I dropped to my knees. My mind raced. The calls, the reports, the warnings. All of it made sense now, or at least pieces of it. The cemetery wasn't empty at night. Something lived beneath the soil. Something that cried, that whispered, that wept. The shape stopped, hovered above the ground. For a moment, I thought it would speak again. But the air itself seemed to reject sound. And then it vanished. The fog remained. The whispers faded, but the weight of the place pressed down on me, suffocating. My flashlight was half buried in the dirt, sputtering weakly. I staggered to my feet, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run, to never look back. I reached the gate, hands trembling. I opened it, and the night air hit me. Cold, sharp, cleansing, but not enough to erase the memory of those eyes, of that sobbing voice, of the whispers in my head. As I drove away, the cemetery faded behind me, swallowed by the fog. But the sound, the crying, it stayed with me, in my chest, in my head. Even now I can hear it when I close my eyes. The soft, broken voice of a woman weeping in the night, calling, waiting. And I know I'll have to go back, because Cedar Hill never forgets, and sometimes it doesn't forgive. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I kept hearing the sobbing in my head, faint, distant, like it had burrowed itself into my skull. Even in the daylight, the sound lingered, a memory I couldn't shake. By the time the sun sank behind the hills, I knew I had to go back. I tried to tell myself it was curiosity, that I needed to check to make sure there was no one there. But the truth? I couldn't leave it alone. Something was wrong. The road to Cedar Hill Cemetery was narrow, flanked by trees that scraped the sky with skeletal fingers. My cruiser's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the familiar path. The air smelled of damp leaves and frost, carrying a faint scent of decay that made my stomach twist. I parked near the old oak at the entrance. The fog had returned thicker this time, curling around the headstones like restless spirits. My flashlight was ready in my hand, but I barely wanted to move. I stepped inside. The gravel crunched under my boots. The cemetery was silent at first, almost oppressively so. Then I heard it, the soft, ragged sound of someone kneeling on the dirt. I froze. A shadow moved among the graves in the corner of my eye. Leaning, bending, pressed close to the ground. My breath caught in my throat. I took a careful step forward, flashlight sweeping the area. There she was, the woman from before, or at least her shadow, kneeling by a small cluster of graves in the children's section. Her head bowed low, shoulders trembling, hands clutching the edge of the dirt. The sobbing was quiet now, controlled, as if she was holding it in, trying not to break completely. I whispered, "Ma'am." The shadow didn't move, didn't even acknowledge me. But as I got closer, I realized something terrible. Every grave she knelt among, children, infants, teenagers, had the same date carved on the headstone. The date wasn't random. It wasn't last year or last decade. It was today. I stumbled back, heart hammering. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the flashlight, and then I saw it. Her grave. The one she was kneeling by. Not a child's, not one I had noticed before. Her grave. And it bore the same date. Today, I swallowed hard. My throat dry. The whisper of wind, or maybe something else, brushed across my face. My skin prickled. The fog seemed to wrap around her, curling and twisting unnaturally. I took a step closer. The shadow's head lifted slightly. Hair fell across her face. Pale. Streaked with something dark. Tears? Blood? I couldn't tell. Her hands pressed against the soil, digging slightly. Not in a frantic way, in a slow, ritualistic motion. Like she was planting herself there, binding herself to the ground. I raised my voice. "Hey, you need help! Stay back!" Nothing. No response. Just that kneeling figure, silent but somehow aware. The sobbing had stopped. In its place, a low, mournful hum that pressed against my chest. I bent down to look at the graves. Every stone, children, women, men, shared the same carved date. All of them today. All of them. Dead! I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a root. My flashlight skittered across the ground. The beam landed on her face again. Her eyes were empty, hollow. But I could feel them looking straight through me, into some part of myself I had kept buried. And then I saw movement beneath the soil. Small ripples, subtle at first, then growing. Dirt shifted as if something tried to push out from below. I took a step back. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might tear through my chest. She didn't notice the rippling earth beneath her. Or maybe she did. Maybe it didn't matter. She stayed kneeling, hands pressed to the dirt. The wind picked up, carrying whispers. My name, repeated softly, over and over through the fog. Sheriff. Dalton. Sheriff. Dalton. I wanted to run, but my feet felt like they were buried in roots and wet earth. I shone the flashlight across the graves again. More ripples, tiny movements rising through the soil. Shapes, hands, faces, small, thin, almost imperceptible, but alive. And then I saw it. At the shadow's knees, the dirt broke open. Something moved upward. Something small, thin, pale, eyes open, blank, staring. It pressed against the soil, trying to rise, but the shadow's hands pressed down, keeping it there, controlling it. Guiding it, I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't move. Not yet. The shadow rose slightly. Head tilted back. Mouth opened, and the sound came. Not a sob this time. Not a cry. But a wordless scream stretching into the fog, into my ears, into my head. It carried grief, endless grief. The kind that breaks you and remakes you. The kind that crawls into your bones and refuses to leave. I stumbled backward. My flashlight slipped, beam bouncing across the gravestones. I caught glimpses of shapes under the soil all around her, not fully formed. Hands, faces, bodies writhing beneath the surface, pressing upward. Trying to get out, I screamed. My voice echoed across the cemetery. The shadow didn't flinch, didn't even acknowledge it. Just stayed kneeling. Then the graves started to shake. All of them. The small mounds of dirt shifting, rising and falling. Hands clawing through the soil. Faces pressing upward, mouths open in silent screams. I realized then, the date wasn't just today. It was a marker. A declaration. She was marking them dead. All of them, including herself. I backed up, my boots slipping in wet earth, heart hammering. The shadow didn't move, but I could feel its presence following me, watching, waiting. I reached the edge of the children's section and turned. For a moment I thought she had vanished, but the kneeling figure was still there, silhouette pressed against the fog, head bowed low. And then I noticed something else. The soil around her wasn't just moving, it was alive. Rising and falling with a rhythm, not random, controlled, guided. The hands of the graves themselves pressed upward, reaching, pushing, and I realized they weren't just reaching for her. They were reaching for me. I ran, through the fog, over roots, across the uneven graves. My flashlight bounced, beam slicing through the mist. The whispering followed me. My name carried on the wind, through the earth, through the shadows. When I reached the gate, I didn't stop to breathe. I threw it open, scrambling into my cruiser. The engine roared to life, cutting through the silence. I drove away, lights illuminating the empty road. The fog clung to the cemetery like a living thing. I didn't look back. I couldn't, but even now, I know she's there, kneeling, marking the graves, holding the dead beneath her in place, claiming them, and one day, I know, one day she'll mark mine too. I can feel it already, the weight of it, the grief that never ends. I started my shift that night like any other. The town was quiet, silent almost, except for the occasional howl of a distant dog or the hum of a passing car on Highway 37. I had my cruiser, my flashlight, and my notebook. Routine checks. That's all it was supposed to be. Routine Cedar Hollow had its share of old cemeteries, forgotten plots, and crumbling mausoleums. Most were well documented. Some weren't. That's how I found myself parked at the edge of a gravel path, staring at something that shouldn't exist. It was a mausoleum. Small stone, weathered black with age. No name. No records in any of the town logs, no maps, nothing. Just tucked at the end of a neglected path, half swallowed by trees and shadows. I hesitated. The night was still. Too still. My flashlight beam didn't reach far, barely cutting a path across the tangled roots and frost-covered grass. I stepped forward, boots crunching, and felt that familiar prickling at the back of my neck. That warning, the one you ignore at your own risk. I drew a slow breath and pushed the door open. Cold air rushed out like it had been trapped for decades. Inside, the air was heavier, thick with the smell of stone, damp, and something else. Something I couldn't name. I swept my flashlight across the interior. Small, square, tight. Dust floated in the beam, dancing in the air. Marble plaques lined the walls, worn and blank in some places, scratched with names in others. Some names I recognized from old cemetery records. Others were entirely unfamiliar. I walked slowly, careful not to touch anything. My hand hovered over one of the plaques. I could feel the cold stone through my gloves. The air felt dense, like it was pressing against me. I flipped open my notebook, pen poised. Patrol notes. Nothing remarkable yet, just observations. Unmarked mausoleum, I wrote. Interior small. Wall plaques, some readable, some eroded. No official record. I circled the room. Flashlight beam catching cracked marble and etched names. One plaque in particular drew my attention. No name, just a date. A single date. Not recent. Not old enough to be entirely faded, just... There, I knelt to get a better look. The marble was rough, chipped and worn. But the numbers were clear. 11/03/1912. Almost 100 years old, yet it stood out in the gloom of the room. I jotted it down. Patrol report. Nothing else? Routine observation. Keep it professional. Then I heard it, a whisper. Soft, dry, like breath through cracks in the wall. I froze, flashlight shaking in my hand. Hello? My own voice sounded strange, swallowed by the mausoleum's stone walls. Nothing, just the whisper of air, or so I told myself. I shook my head and pressed on. The interior was simple. A stone bench along the side, dust-covered floor, nothing to indicate why the place wasn't listed anywhere. Yet the air, it was charged. Taut, almost alive. I moved to the far corner. My flashlight caught a section of wall with no plaques at all, just bare stone. And yet, something felt off. The shadows seemed to lean toward me. I swore the edges of the walls twisted, curling slightly in the beam. I blinked. They snapped back. I took a note. Routine, patrol, observations only, but my hand shook as I wrote. The whisper came again. Harder this time. Not words, just sound. Breath through the stone. I couldn't place a direction. Not left, not right, just everywhere. I paused. I tried to convince myself it was a draft, a vent. Maybe a hollow section of wall carrying air from outside. Logical explanations. I repeated them in my mind, but the temperature had dropped. My breath came in shallow clouds. The beam of my flashlight caught. Movement, a shadow, a flicker along the back wall. Fast, gone in a blink. I swallowed hard. Heart thumping. I jotted in my notebook, shadow movement, unconfirmed. Could be fatigue or low light conditions. Every part of me screamed that it was more than that. I circled the room again, carefully. The whisper returned, softer now, teasing. Not quite audible, not quite imagined. The hairs on my arms rose. My gloves felt clammy. On the far wall, a plaque I hadn't noticed before. Polished, smooth, freshly cleaned, almost out of place. My flashlight trembled as I approached. No name, only a date. Today's date. I stumbled back, tripping slightly over dust-covered stone. My pen slipped in my notebook. My pulse raced. I wrote it down anyway. Plaque. Date inscribed today. No name. I forced myself to breathe. Professional. Objective. This is what I would write in the report. Document it, don't speculate. But the whisper grew louder, almost forming words. My own name. Sheriff. I froze. My flashlight beam bounced, catching the corner of the wall. The plaque shimmered faintly in the light, like it had absorbed it. Or reflected it differently. I gritted my teeth. Patrol report. Routine. Not supernatural. Not yet, I jotted. Feeling of presence. Whispering heard. Could be acoustics. We'll follow up. Then came the smell. Cold stone, dust, damp. And something faintly metallic. Sharp. Like rusted iron. I gagged. Not violently, just enough to realize I was inhaling something wrong. I stepped back, careful not to knock over anything. My flashlight caught the floor. Tiny scratches. Thin, shallow lines across the stone, leading toward the far corner. I knelt to inspect. The scratches looked fresh, bright against the gray dust. I wrote, "Scratches on floor. Appears recent. No logical explanation." I rose, heart hammering, flashlight shaking. The whispering ceased. The temperature returned to normal. The mausoleum was just stone and shadows again, but my chest still ached. My hands still trembled. I walked to the door. The fog outside had thickened, curling in through the broken edges of the frame. One last glance at the interior. The shadows seemed to stretch, longer than they should. I jotted my final note. Mausoleum appears unlisted. Wall plaques, some old, some fresh. Presence felt. Further observation required. I closed the door behind me. The chill from inside lingered on my gloves and face. I locked the door, though I knew it wouldn't stop anything. It never did. I got in my cruiser, started the engine. The road was empty, silent. The fog clung to the trees like smoke. Even now, hours later, I can feel it. That place, waiting, watching, whispering. I filed my report the next morning. Objective, routine, professional. No mention of shadows, no mention of whispers. Only facts, dates, plaques, unlisted mausoleum. But I know, the walls remember me, the stone knows my name, and one day I have a feeling the patrol report won't be enough. The storm came suddenly. Heavy rain, hammering the streets and bouncing off my cruiser like it wanted to break through the metal. The sky was black, clouds moving fast, lit occasionally by pale flashes of lightning. Wind shredded the trees, snapping branches, whipping leaves into the road. I was finishing my routine checks along the outskirts of Cedar Hollow when I saw it. The mausoleum. I had been by it before, of course. Checked it on patrol. Nothing remarkable, locked, quiet, dead silent. Tonight, the door was ajar. A slow, creaking open that seemed impossibly deliberate, like it had waited for me. The wind whipped through the opening, carrying the smell of wet stone, moss, and something else I couldn't name. Metallic, faintly sharp. I stepped closer, flashlight in hand, and the rain stung my face. My fingers tightened on the handle. The feeling I had felt the first night I entered, pressure in my chest, hair on my neck rising, hit me full force. I whispered to myself, trying to steady my voice. Probably just the storm. Probably. I paused at the threshold. Water dripped from the roof onto the stone floor. I leaned in. The interior looked the same at first. Dust and damp, plaques on the walls, shadows dancing in the beam of my flashlight. But there was something off. The shelves. I froze, empty. Every single shelf, designed to hold bodies, was empty, clean, polished, and not old, faded, neglected like the plaques outside. These were freshly prepared, waiting. For something, I swallowed hard. My flashlight beam moved slowly across the rows of shelves, each one identical. Not a single sign of a coffin, a body, or even the faint trace of dust from decades of decay. Just emptiness. My hand shook as I scribbled in my notebook. Patrol notes. Professional. Observations. Objective. Shelves inside mausoleum empty. Prepared for interment. No records indicate recent use. I stepped further inside. The air was cold, unnaturally so. The rain outside made everything damp, but inside it felt sterile. Dead air that clung to my skin and filled my lungs with something heavy. Lightning flashed through the cracks in the stone. Shadows shifted in ways they shouldn't. I thought I saw shapes, just at the edges of the flashlight, moving between the shelves, stretching and twisting like smoke. I told myself it was my imagination. Fatigue, rain, low light. Everything logical, and yet the whisper started. Soft, insistent, not carried by the wind, not echoing off the walls. In my head, the same tone I had felt before. Sheriff Dalton. I stumbled back, gripping the flashlight so tightly my knuckles turned white. My hand hovered over a shelf. The wood was cold, smooth, untouched. I could almost hear the echo of my own heartbeat in the stillness. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room fully for a second. And I swear I saw them. Not figures, not ghosts exactly, just outlines. Shadows pressed into the walls, the shelves, the floor. Watching me, waiting. The door creaked again, slowly. Wind or not, it sounded deliberate. As if the mausoleum itself breathed, inhaling the storm, and exhaling it toward me. I backed away, jotting more notes in my notebook. Observations, facts, don't panic, professional. Door appears to open on its own. Interior shelves empty. Presence felt. Atmospheric conditions may contribute. I forced myself to take a step closer to the back wall. Another row of shelves, all empty, and yet I could feel them. Beneath the wood, something pressed up from below. A pulse, slow, deliberate. Pressing against the floor beneath the foundations of the mausoleum. The whisper came again, louder, closer. My name. My name in the voice of the stone, the air, the shadows. I stumbled. Nearly dropped my flashlight. The beam hit the farthest wall, and there they were. Small, subtle indentations in the wood. Marks, almost like fingernails scraping from inside. I swallowed hard. My chest burned. My notebook shook in my hand. I had to stay professional. Write it down. Document. That's all. Marks on shelves. Appear to be from within. Direction unclear. No visible source. Another creak. The door shuddered. Not from the wind, but from something heavier. Something patient. Waiting. I stepped back again. My boots slipped in the puddles of rainwater carried inside by the wind. The air grew colder. I could see my breath. Fog forming from inside me, the shadows stretched. Between the shelves, behind the plaques, shapes that weren't quite human. Not figures, not alive, but moving, watching. I forced myself to keep writing. Patrol notes, observations, do not speculate. Do not panic, interior temperature drop observed. Air movement unnatural. Shadows appear to shift independently. Presence confirmed. I paused. The whisper had stopped. The mausoleum was silent. Too silent. The storm raged outside, but inside, nothing. Just the smell of damp stone, wood and metal, lingering, suffocating. I moved to the door. Lightning struck outside, illuminating the black, wet night. Rain slashed across the threshold. One last glance. The shelves, empty. Silent. Waiting. I stepped out. Closed the door, pushed against it. Locked it as best I could. But the feeling didn't leave me. The weight of the empty shelves, the presence beneath them, the whisper of my own name pressed into my mind. Even now, hours later, I can feel it. The emptiness. Waiting. Watching. I filed my patrol report the next day. Professional, objective. No mention of shadows, no mention of whispers. Only facts. Shelves empty. Door ajar. Weather noted. But I know what I felt. And I know what was waiting. The mausoleum has doors that shouldn't open. And someday, they will. I thought I was prepared. I thought I could handle it. After the door opened on its own, after the empty shelves, I told myself I was ready for anything, but nothing could have prepared me for this. I arrived at the mausoleum just before midnight. The storm from the previous night had passed, leaving the air damp and heavy. Fog curled along the gravestones and paths leading up to the stone structure. The road was quiet. Too quiet. The door was closed this time, locked. Or at least it looked locked. But I didn't trust it. My flashlight cut a thin path through the fog as I approached. Every instinct in me told me to leave. Every instinct I ignored. Inside, the mausoleum felt different. Thicker. Denser. The air had weight. The same heavy scent of damp stone and metal lingered. But now there was another note. Sharp, acrid, like something had been scraping the walls. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the room. The shelves were still empty, exactly as they had been. Dust lay thick on the floor, except there. Small marks, shallow at first. I leaned closer, scratches, fresh, deep, gouges in the stone walls. I staggered back. My pen slipped from my hand as I reached for my notebook. Patrol notes, document, record, professional, scratches observed. Interior walls of mausoleum. Fresh, deep gouges. Direction of source unknown. I moved closer, hand trembling. The scratches ran along the walls, haphazard at first, then in patterns that made no sense. Some vertical, some diagonal, almost claw-like. The stone had been worn away. The raw lines shone darker in the beam of my flashlight. I felt it before I saw it. A presence behind me. Not just watching, but aware. Waiting. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe evenly. The whispering had started again. Low, subtle, insistent. "Sheriff?" "Dalton!" My pulse hammered. I turned the flashlight slowly. Nothing. Only the long, empty shadows between the shelves. But I could feel it. Moving, shifting, not fully formed. Something alive beneath the stone floor. I circled the room, trying to keep my flashlight steady. Every step echoed against the walls. The scratches continued as if they were reaching for me. The patterns grew more deliberate, more organized. I could almost feel a rhythm beneath them, like a heartbeat pressed into the stone itself. I crouched near the largest gouge, tracing the line with my gloved hand. Stone dust crumbled beneath my fingers. The scratches were deep. Not just surface marks, they had been made with strength. Purpose, I wrote it down. Scratches deep, deliberate. Appears forceful. Material removed, stone dust present. The whisper came again, louder now. Not a voice from outside, but inside my head. Closer, breathing my name. Pulling me toward the far wall, I stumbled backward, tripping over my own boots. The flashlight beam swung wildly, catching the shadows along the shelves. For a split second, I saw them, shapes pressed into the walls, stretching and twisting. Not fully human, not fully formed, just wrong. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move. Professional, patrol notes, observations, nothing more. Presence felt. Whispering heard. Scratch marks significant. Further observation required. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the room for a fraction of a second. The scratches seemed to shift, elongate, and twist. I blinked. It was impossible. Stone didn't move. And yet, it had. Or at least my eyes insisted it had. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to stop shaking. This was the duty. The patrol. I wasn't here to get caught up in shadows or whispers. I was here to document, to record facts. But the scratching didn't stop. It moved along the walls, deeper, louder. A scraping sound now audible, echoing off the stone. My flashlight caught another gouge. Long, deep, shallow at one end, widening as if something had been trying to claw its way out. I stepped closer. My boots sunk into the damp floor. My fingers trembled as I touched the stone. It vibrated faintly under my fingertips. The scratches felt alive, fresh, hungry. I swallowed, writing again. Scratches appear self-propelled. Surface stone shows where inconsistent with natural causes. A sudden gust of wind, though the door was closed. The mausoleum seemed to shudder. Dust rose from the floor. The whispering intensified, repeating my name, stretching it, bending it in ways that made my head spin. I stumbled backward, tripping over a small stone slab. My flashlight fell to the floor. Its beam bounced across the walls, illuminating the scratches, and for a fraction of a second, I saw a shape, not fully there, not solid, just a shadow curling in the lines of the gouges. Stretching, reaching, waiting. I scrambled to pick up the flashlight, hands slick with sweat. My notebook lay on the floor. I grabbed it, scribbling in chaotic handwriting. Patrol notes, observations, objective, scratches animate, shadow shapes observed, source unknown, room temperature dropping, presence overwhelming, the temperature plummeted. My breath came in white clouds. The shadows deepened, stretching across the walls into the corners, pooling in the shelves. The whispering became multiple voices now, overlapping, insistent, calling me forward, pulling me toward the far wall. I stumbled toward the exit, trying to steady myself. My eyes kept darting to the scratches. They were moving. Not just marks, but shapes. Fingers, hands, small, thin, stretching from the walls, reaching for me. I forced myself to stay calm. Professional, patrol report, document, record, facts. Wall marks exhibit movement, suggestive of sentience. Cannot confirm visual presence fully. The whispering intensified, now almost a roar inside my head. My name, my thoughts, my fear, all pressed together in a crushing weight. I backed against the far wall, flashlight beam catching the deepest gouges. Shadows twisted inside them, rising, writhing, almost forming faces. Hollow, screaming faces, empty eyes fixed on me. I stumbled to the door. My hands trembled so badly I could barely turn the handle. The mausoleum seemed to resist me. The scratches stretched, curling toward the threshold as if they were trying to hold me in. I yanked the door open, stumbling outside. The night air hit me like a wall. Rain had returned, tapping on the roof, cooling my skin, washing away the dust from the mausoleum floor. I didn't stop to breathe. Didn't look back. My boots sank into wet leaves and mud as I ran to my cruiser. The fog hung low, thickening with every step. The whispers continued, soft now, fading with distance, but never gone. I sat in my cruiser, heart hammering, flashlight resting on the passenger seat, notebook in my lap. I tried to steady my hands enough to write the final notes for my report. Scratches observed. Appearing overnight, gouges deep, deliberate, movement noted, presence felt. Shadows observed. Further investigation required. Even now, hours later, I can feel it. The way the stone seemed to reach for me. The whispers pressed behind my eyes. The shadows curling in the scratches, waiting. The mausoleum is not empty. The shelves may be bare. The walls may be stone. But something lives in the scratches. Something patient. Something that remembers, and I know. It will not stay quiet forever. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with it. Fog crawled along the ground like something alive, curling around gravestones and the edge of the road. The mausoleum sat at the end of the path, silent, unassuming, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching. I parked my cruiser a safe distance away, flashlight in hand, notebook tucked under my arm. Heart pounding. I'd been out here too many times already. Too many nights alone with stone, shadows, and whispers. And yet some part of me kept drawing me back. Curiosity, duty, fear. Maybe all three. I approached the mausoleum slowly. The door was closed. Locked, I thought, though nothing felt certain anymore. The air inside seemed to press outward, cold and dense, waiting. I stopped a few feet from the door, breathing hard, hand hovering over my flashlight. And then I heard it. 3 knocks. Distinct, solid, measured, not loud enough to echo outside the building, but clear, sharp against the wet stone. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. I swallowed hard. Hello? I called, trying to keep my voice steady. Nothing. The fog swallowed it immediately. Another set of knocks. 3 again, slow, deliberate. I stepped closer. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying my name. Or maybe I imagined it. My flashlight beam caught the door. It didn't move. But the knocks came again, insistent, pressing against my chest like the fog itself was alive. I raised my notebook, jotting down the observation. Patrol report, document, professional. Knocks heard, 3, measured, from mausoleum interior. Source unknown. No visible cause. I tried the handle, locked, solid. Nothing moved. And yet, I could feel it. Behind the door, something waiting, watching, patient. I leaned closer, ear near the wood. Another knock. 3 again, and this time I swear I felt it. A vibration. Not through the air, but through the ground, the door, the very air around me. A pulse, deep and slow, timed with the knocks. I staggered back, gripping my flashlight. My notebook shook in my hand. The rain-soaked fog pressed against me, chilling me to the bone. I thought of leaving, turning my back and never coming back. But I couldn't. Not yet. Another set of knocks. 3. I pressed my palm against the door, cold, solid. Nothing moved inside. And yet, the sound continued, insistent, repeating, taunting. I forced myself to take notes. Patrol procedure, observations, don't speculate, don't panic, just record. Knocks 3, repeated intervals. Direction, interior. Door locked, solid, no wind influence detected. Observation continued. My flashlight beam swept the building, pausing on the edges where the stone met the sky. Shadows pooled unnaturally, shifting against the walls, curling like fingers. The knocks continued, relentless, pounding through the silence. I whispered, "Who's there?" My voice sounded fragile, swallowed by the night. And then I heard something else. A whisper, soft, almost beneath the threshold of hearing. "Sheriff." My blood ran cold. The voice was inside my head, not outside. Familiar, insistent, calling, not malicious, not angry, desperate, patient. I staggered backward. My notebook slipped to the wet ground. I bent to pick it up, fumbling in the mud, heart hammering. The knocks didn't stop. 3, pause, 3, pause, 3. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to focus. Notes, facts, observations, presence felt. Audible sound, 3 knocks repeated. Whispering detected. Investigate further with caution. I lifted my flashlight, shining it at the door again. The shadows seemed to thicken, flicker, shift. I thought I saw them move closer, stretching along the stone like smoke. Following the beam, another knock. 3. Perfect. Measured. Insistent. I could feel it behind the door. Something breathing, waiting, watching, patient. Not fully formed, not alive, but aware. I stepped back, mind racing. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to get in my cruiser and drive until the fog swallowed me. But I couldn't. Duty, curiosity, fear, all of it tied me to that spot. I knelt, flashlight beam scanning the threshold. Tiny scratches along the wood, faint like claws. Fresh, deep. The same as the gouges inside the mausoleum, I scribbled furiously in my notebook. Knocks accompanied by scratches along door. Material displaced. Wood fibers. Possibly interior source? Source unknown. Another set of 3 knocks. My teeth clenched. My palms sweated. I could feel the vibration through the soles of my boots, up my legs, settling in my chest. It was alive. The building itself felt alive. I thought of the empty shelves, the scratches in the stone, the whispers that followed me home, the presence beneath it all. Waiting, watching. Another set of 3 knocks. This time I flinched. The sound resonated with my own heartbeat. My flashlight beam wavered. I felt it pressing into my skull, my chest, my gut. The fog seemed to creep closer, curling around my boots. I whispered, voice trembling, "What do you want?" No answer. Just the knocks. 3. Pause. 3. Pause. 3. I tried the handle again. Locked. Solid. No movement. The mausoleum remained silent in all ways except the knocking, except the presence, except the weight of eyes I could not see. Lightning split the sky outside, briefly illuminating the shadows pressed against the walls, twisting like they had something to reach for. I stumbled back, flashlight beam dancing across the stone, and then I heard it clearly, not in my head this time, but inside the mausoleum. A scraping, slow, intentional, moving along the shelves. I swallowed hard, forcing my breathing into control. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the notebook. Patrol notes, document, facts, professional, interior activity confirmed, scratching, moving along shelves. Sound coincides with knocks. Further investigation required with backup. I took a step back. The fog wrapped tighter around me. The building loomed, silent but alive. And still, the knocks continued. 3, pause, 3, pause, 3. My mind raced. I knew I should leave. I knew that the things I had witnessed, the empty shelves, the scratches inside, the whispering, were only the beginning. The knocks were deliberate, patient calling. I could feel them watching me, waiting for me to step inside. To open the door. To enter, I didn't move. My legs were frozen, heart hammering. I could hear my own pulse in my ears matching the rhythm of the knocks. 3, pause, 3, pause, 3. I whispered again, almost to myself, almost in defiance, I'm not coming in. The knocking stopped, just for a moment, and then 3 more. I backed away, notebook in hand, flashlight trembling. The mausoleum loomed behind me, silent and waiting. The fog pressed in. The night swallowed me. Even as I drove away, every street lamp passing through the windshield, I could still hear it. 3 knocks, repeating, counting, waiting. I filed my report the next morning. Objective, professional. No mention of whispers, no mention of shadows, no mention of the feeling pressing into my chest. Only the facts, knocks observed. Door locked, scratches present. Further observation recommended. But I know the truth. The mausoleum doesn't just have empty shelves. It doesn't just hold stone and dust. It listens. It waits, and the knocks. They will never stop. I shouldn't have gone inside. Every instinct screamed at me to stay away. But something in the repeated knocks, in the empty shelves, in the whispers that followed me home, drew me forward. I couldn't ignore it. I had to know. The night was heavy, thick with fog that clung to my jacket and dripped from the brim of my hat. The mausoleum loomed at the end of the path, stone blackened by years of weather. The door was closed, locked, solid, yet I knew it wouldn't stop me. I slid my hand over the handle, and it gave. Slow, resistant, creaking, but yielding. I stepped inside. The air hit me like a wall, cold, damp, heavy with something metallic and decayed. My flashlight beam swung across the room, illuminating shelves that were still empty, scratches deep in the walls, but something new caught my attention immediately. Badges. Sheriff's badges. Dozens of them, nailed into the stone. Some polished and gleaming, others tarnished black with age. My hand shook as I counted. Dozens of badges from decades of predecessors, all nailed into the wall, all facing outward as if on display. I swallowed hard. I knew most of the men who had held the badge in Cedar Hollow. Some retired quietly, some died in accidents, others disappeared. Their badges were here, all of them. I tried to focus. Professional, patrol notes, observations, no speculation. Interior walls, badges from past sheriffs affixed to stone. Number, 32 confirmed. Ages vary, decades represented. Condition, mixed, polished to tarnished. The room smelled worse now. Iron, rust, dampness, and something else. Something that made the back of my throat tighten. I felt it pressing against my chest, low and heavy, as if the mausoleum itself knew my heartbeat. I stepped closer to the wall. Each badge was nailed carefully, deliberately, in patterns I couldn't understand. Some arranged by date, some by size, some overlapping, almost like layers of history pressed into the stone. I traced a finger over one of the older badges. Cold, smooth. The name etched into it was familiar. A sheriff who vanished decades ago, never found. I'd read the reports as a new deputy. Young, promising, gone without a trace. And now his badge stared back at me. I wrote in my notebook, fingers trembling. Badge affixed to wall, former sheriff vanished 1962. Condition, tarnished. Implications, unknown. Investigation required. The whispers started again. Soft, low, insistent. Repeating my name, echoing off the stone. Curling through the room like smoke. I forced myself to breathe. Professional, observations, notes, facts. Presence confirmed. Whispering voices detected. Direction, interior. Could be acoustical, but personal perception. Auditory hallucination possible. I circled the room. The shelves remained empty. Scratches etched into the stone. Shadows curled in corners, stretching as my flashlight passed. And all the while, the badges stared, watching, waiting. Another flash of lightning outside illuminated the room briefly. I thought I saw something move behind the badges, a slight shift in the shadows, as if they were breathing, stretching. I blinked. Nothing. I stumbled, catching myself against the edge of a shelf. My flashlight wavered. The whispering grew louder. Sheriff Dalton. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to write. Auditory input. Personal name repeated. Intensity, high. Cause, undetermined. Observation, ongoing. I felt drawn toward the wall. Against my better judgment, I stepped closer, tracing the pattern of badges. They were nailed high, low, sometimes sideways, as if the arrangement itself meant something. I couldn't decipher it. Couldn't understand why the mausoleum had collected them, preserved them, displayed them like trophies. My flashlight caught one badge at eye level. It was newer, polished, almost shining. My own badge. I froze, heart hammering. My fingers trembled. Couldn't be. Couldn't be mine. I'd carried it here that night, but how? Why? Was it on the wall with the others? I touched it gently. Cold. Solid. Nailed into the stone. I stumbled back. Wrote it down in my notebook, almost unable to hold the pen. Badge affixed to wall, current sheriff, self, verification required. Condition, polished, nailed. Observation, shocking, unexplained. The whispers rose to a chorus now. Overlapping voices. Past sheriffs, perhaps, calling, warning, taunting. Each syllable tugged at my mind, pressing against my skull. I shook my head, trying to steady myself. I could feel the walls closing in. The scratches along the stone now seemed deeper, fresher, moving, reaching. Not with hands, not with claws, but with intent. Something alive pressed beneath the stone, under the badges, under the empty shelves, under me. I stumbled toward the exit. My boots slipped on damp stone. My flashlight swung wildly, illuminating the shadows pressed into the walls, curling around the badges, pooling in the corners. Another flash of lightning, and I saw them. Faces etched into the shadows behind the badges. Hollow eyes, twisted mouths, silent screams. They were layered, dozens of them, pressed behind the stone, reaching out, locked behind time. I gagged. The metallic smell grew stronger. Iron rust decay. I could taste it on my tongue. I forced myself to breathe, forcing my hands to write, forcing myself to record. Interior walls, shadows observed behind badges. Apparent faces, hollow eyes, silent screams. Atmospheric effect? Possible hallucination. Observation ongoing. Presence, overwhelming. My flashlight beam caught mine again. The badge on the wall. My name etched in metal, cold, solid, real. And I could feel it pressing at me, pulling at my thoughts, my memories, my fear. I stumbled to the shelves, running my hand over the stone. The scratches deepened, moved, reached toward me. The whispering now merged with the shadows, with the badges, with the scratches. A single voice, layered, insistent, patient. Come. Join us! I stumbled backward. My notebook fell. I fumbled for my flashlight. The room seemed impossibly dark, impossibly vast, shadows stretching far beyond the walls. I knew I had to leave, had to get out. But I glanced at the wall again. My own badge, polished, nailed, watching, waiting, the weight of it pressed on my chest, on my mind, on my soul. I stumbled to the door, pulled, locked, solid, resistant. I pushed harder. The air seemed to resist me. Whispering rose to a deafening chorus, the shadows twisting behind the stone. I finally forced the door open. Cold night air rushed in. Fog rolled in from the cemetery, chilling my soaked clothes. I stumbled onto the path, heart hammering, hands shaking, notebook clutched like a lifeline. I didn't look back. I drove away, tires slapping through puddles, fog curling around the cruiser like fingers. Hours later, I could still feel it. The whispers, the shadows, the badges, the presence beneath it all. Waiting, watching, remembering. I filed my patrol report the next morning. Objective, professional. No mention of the whispers, no mention of shadows or faces. Only facts. Badges observed. Wall condition. Further investigation recommended. But I know The mausoleum is not just stone and empty shelves. It collects, preserves, remembers. And someday, it will remember me too. I never expected to see anything like that on my first graveyard patrol. Cedar Hill Cemetery had always been quiet at night. Wind through the trees, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustle of leaves, routine, safe. Until that night, I was driving slowly along the wet gravel path, my headlights slicing through the mist. The air smelled of damp earth, rain-soaked leaves, and something faintly metallic. I had already checked the old mausoleum at the far end, making notes in my patrol log. Nothing unusual, just shadows, fog, and the quiet hum of the night. Then I saw them, a line of figures moving along the path. Lanterns held high, swaying gently in the dark. At first I thought it was a funeral party, maybe a late service, a small family gathering. But as I drew closer, I realized something wasn't right. The line stretched endlessly, far longer than it should have for a single family. Faces were hidden beneath hoods, heads bowed. There was no chatter, no rustle of conversation, only the soft flicker of lanterns casting long, trembling shadows across the graves. And they were following a coffin. It moved slowly, carried on wooden poles by figures whose hands didn't tremble. I could see the wood grain in the lantern light. The coffin was simple, unmarked, but it had weight, presence. I slowed to a crawl, heart hammering. Something in me screamed that I shouldn't be here, but curiosity pushed me forward. Professional duty? Maybe. Something darker? Definitely. The closer I got, the more details came into focus. Lanterns were old-fashioned, heavy, and each flame burned a pale, almost blue light. Faces occasionally flickered in the beam of my headlights. Pale skin, hollow eyes, expressionless. Some looked almost wrong, too still, too quiet. I flicked on my siren briefly, thinking to stop them, see if it was a prank or a local tradition I didn't know about. Nothing, not a sound, not a glance. The line moved past me as if I wasn't there, the coffin sliding along the gravel like it had its own momentum. I forced myself to take notes. Patrol log, observations, keep professional. Time, 23:47. Location, Cedar Hill Cemetery, Northwest Path. Observed line of unknown individuals carrying a coffin. Lanterns present. Participants, estimated 20 plus, exact number unknown. Behavior, silent, methodical, continuous movement. No vocal communication detected. Physical description, cloaked, faces obscured. I shivered. Something about the air had changed. Cold, heavy, pressing against my chest. The lanterns flickered more violently in the wind, or maybe in response to me. I couldn't tell. I followed at a distance, staying close enough to observe, far enough to remain unseen. Every grave we passed seemed to deepen the shadow around the procession. Flowers, stones, markers, they all looked different in the lantern light. Older graves leaned toward the path, almost as if reaching out. Then I noticed it. One of the mourners, closer now, stopped moving altogether. The line shifted around them. Their head lifted just slightly, and I saw eyes, black, deep, endless black. Not human eyes. I swallowed. My hand tightened on the flashlight. Professional. Observe. Document. Don't panic, I scribbled quickly. Individual observed with irregular ocular characteristics. Position, third from coffin. Behavior, motionless, observing surrounding area. I kept moving, keeping the beam steady. My boots sank slightly into the wet gravel. The smell of earth was stronger now, mixed with something sweet, decayed. And then I realized the coffin wasn't moving naturally. It wasn't just the bearers carrying it. It felt alive. Every step the pallbearers took, it seemed to breathe, to pulse, to resist and yield in time with some unspoken rhythm. The line turned along the old stone wall of the cemetery. Lantern light glinted against iron fences and broken tombstones. Shadows flickered and danced. I caught glimpses of faces beneath the hoods, pale, taut, emotionless. And then, just at the edge of my flashlight, I thought I saw movement inside the coffin. A flicker, a shift. Almost imperceptible, but enough to make my stomach turn. I jotted it down. Movement within coffin. Observed. Indistinct. Timing coincides with procession steps. Requires verification. I slowed the cruiser and lowered my window slightly. The air was colder than it should have been. The lantern flames wavered, casting long shadows on the wet stones. I thought I could hear whispers, but when I rolled up the window, the sound vanished. The line moved as if guided by something beyond reason. Every step synchronized, every pause deliberate. Not one figure looked around. Not one glanced toward me. It was like watching history repeat itself. Some ritual older than memory, moving silently through time. And then I noticed the graves they passed were different. Not all, but some had markers I didn't recognize. Dates centuries old, names I didn't know, and each one seemed freshly tended, soil dark and wet as if recently turned. Yet no one was working the graves. No tools, no hands, just the silent procession. I scribbled faster. Grave markers, multiple historical dates, maintained appearance despite lack of personnel. Soil freshly turned, no evidence of activity. The coffin reached the far side of the cemetery. The line slowed. A figure at the head raised a hand, and the lanterns dimmed slightly, as if in obedience. The coffin lowered gently into an unmarked grave. Soil was turned by invisible hands, covering it evenly, perfectly. The line paused, bowed their heads, and then, almost imperceptibly, began to move back the way they came. I swallowed hard, heart pounding. Something about the scene felt sacred or cursed. I didn't know which. I kept my distance, watching as they disappeared into the fog, lanterns swinging softly, fading, leaving nothing but mist and the faint smell of wet earth and iron. I sat in my cruiser, notebook open, hands shaking. Patrol notes, observations, professional facts. Coffin interment completed. Procedure observed, coordinated, silent. Lanterns 12 observed, flame pale blue. Participants, cloaked, exact number unknown. No verbal communication. Grave prepared without visible effort. Environmental conditions, fog present, soil wet. I drove slowly along the path on my way back, trying to process what I'd seen. Rational thoughts collided with instinctive fear. Who were they? What did they carry? And why did it feel like the cemetery itself had shifted to accommodate them? I thought about the hollow eyes, the pale faces, the coffin that seemed alive. My mind reached for explanations. Tradition? Cult? Prank? But nothing fit. Every detail, the synchronized steps, the dimmed lanterns, the freshly turned soil, pointed to something else. Something I couldn't name. Even now I can feel the memory pressing into me. The fog curling along the path, the pale flames reflecting off stone, the whispers that may have been in my head or the air itself, the sensation of standing outside the procession, invisible yet watched. I filed my report in the morning. Objective, professional, no speculation, no mention of the figures, no mention of the flicker inside the coffin, no mention of the way the cemetery felt alive around me. Just facts, dates, times, observations, but I know the truth. Somewhere in Cedar Hill Cemetery at night, the dead are never alone. The living sometimes join them. Lanterns move, coffins breathe, soil turns, and I saw it all. I will never forget the line of figures, carrying a coffin through the fog, every lantern a small, trembling flame against the darkness. And I know I am not the only one who has watched. Morning came slow and gray, dragging itself over the horizon with a chill that seeped into my bones. Cedar Hill Cemetery looked ordinary again, quiet and still, as if the procession had never happened. Fog lingered, thinner now, drifting over gravestones and patches of wet earth. I arrived early, parked at the edge of the cemetery, and stepped out to take a look. The gravel crunched under my boots. I expected fresh soil, disturbed grass, some sign of the coffin or the mourners. But there was nothing. Not a single new grave. No soil turned. No footprints. The cemetery had returned to its usual stillness, perfectly normal. I frowned, flipping open my patrol notebook. Notes from last night stared back at me. The line of lanterns, the coffin, the pale faces, the silent, measured steps. Had I imagined it? The memory felt too sharp, too real. The smell of damp earth, the soft creak of the coffin, the way the lanterns cast blue flames across the graves. But now, nothing. I walked along the path the procession had taken, flashlight off, only relying on the soft gray light of dawn. Every grave I passed looked ordinary. Moss-covered stones, names worn smooth by rain, flowers wilted in the cold morning. No sign of activity, nothing out of place. I made a call to the cemetery office. The voice on the other end was bright, routine, oblivious. I asked about funerals scheduled last night. No funerals. Nothing recorded. No burials, no family visits, no new plots. I scribbled a note. Cemetery records. No funeral schedule. No burial logs. No new graves. Observed discrepancy with previous night's activity. I drove slowly through the rows, stopping at the far end where I remembered the coffin descending. Nothing. Just the damp earth. Neatly pressed as if nothing had happened. My stomach twisted. The memory was so vivid. The coffin, the lanterns, the silence. And yet here I was, facing a cemetery that denied it had ever occurred. I parked at the mausoleum. Last night's storm had left streaks of water down the stone walls. The door was closed, solid. No scratches. No signs of struggle. The air smelled of damp stone and wet moss, nothing more. I knelt, running a hand over the threshold, checking for anything out of place. Nothing. I thought back to the figures, their faces pale, hollow, eyes black and unreadable beneath their hoods. The lanterns flickered in sync, almost alive. I remembered the coffin pulse, the rhythm, the slow swaying, as if it moved on its own. And now, silence, denial, a cemetery that refused to acknowledge the truth. I pulled out my notebook, trying to keep professional, to document facts without letting fear seep into my writing. Observation. Cemetery shows no evidence of nocturnal procession. No new graves, no soil disturbance, no footprints. Contradiction. Visual and olfactory cues from previous night not confirmed by records or physical evidence. Further monitoring recommended. I walked further into the cemetery, circling the area. A crow took flight from a gnarled oak, cawing as it passed overhead. The sound startled me more than it should have. Last night, silence had dominated. Now the usual morning sounds made me aware of just how alone I felt. I tried to explain it rationally, forcing my mind to consider the possibilities. Could it have been a hallucination? Fatigue? Last night had been a long shift, my first on the graveyard patrol. Maybe I had imagined the line, the lanterns, the coffin. Maybe I had fallen into some trick of shadows, fog, and imagination. But no, I could still feel it. The pulse of the coffin, the weight of their eyes, the way the lanterns burned that pale light. The memory pressed against me as clearly as the cold wind against my face, and no amount of rational thought could erase it. I circled the empty plot again. The ground was untouched, no depression in the soil to indicate a burial. I knelt and pressed my hands to the earth. Solid, unbroken. I tried to tell myself it was coincidence, some prank, a local tradition I didn't know about. But the thought felt weak, hollow. I remembered the eyes. The black, endless eyes of the figure at the head of the line. Not human, not alive. And now, gone. Denied by reality. I scribbled more notes. Environmental cues consistent with nocturnal activity. Fog, moisture, ambient cold. Contradiction with cemetery records and physical evidence. Perceptual anomaly cannot be explained. Professional recommendation. Continued observation and security monitoring. I walked past the rows of graves, noticing small details I'd never paid attention to before. Moss patterns, cracks in the stone, rust on the iron fences. The cemetery felt familiar, comforting even, but something underneath it all hummed, a quiet vibration at the edge of perception. I remembered the whispers, soft, urgent, calling my name in the darkness. Last night they were faint, almost unnoticed, yet persistent. I pressed my hands over my ears and shook my head, trying to deny them, to prove that reality was solid and sane. But now, in the daylight, the memory of them pressed harder. My own name, drawn out, echoing off unseen walls. I could feel it pressing behind my eyes. I could feel it beneath the stone underfoot, beneath the graves, waiting, patient, silent. I climbed back into my cruiser, hands cold, notebook open. Patrol notes, observations, documentation, objective, facts. No mention of whispers. No mention of the eyes. No mention of the coffin or the figures. Yet I knew. I drove along the cemetery boundary looking for any sign, any indication that the events of the previous night had left a trace. Nothing. Gravel paths smooth, grass pressed by rain. No footprints, no lanterns, no coffin. Denial in stone and soil. I thought of filing a report, calling it a hallucination, fatigue, or stress. But I knew that wasn't true. Something had happened. Something that no record, no mourning, no reality could erase. I wrote the last note in my patrol log. Further observation required. Event uncorroborated by records or physical evidence. Memory of nocturnal procession persists. Professional monitoring recommended. I drove out of the cemetery slowly, eyes scanning the tree line and fog for any sign, any flicker of lantern light. Nothing. The road was empty, quiet. The fog began to thin. The morning sun struggled to break through, but I could still see them. In my mind, following the coffin, lanterns swaying in time, pale and flickering, faces hidden beneath hoods, eyes black, endless, silent, watching, waiting. Even as the day pressed on, even as the town stirred awake, I couldn't shake it. The cemetery had denied it happened. Records said nothing. The ground refused to remember. But I did, and I knew it wasn't over. I was driving the long stretch of Highway 37 just past midnight, the fog thick enough to hide the trees and the roadside gravestones. The headlights cut through it, a narrow ribbon of light, but the edges were soft, blurred. Everything felt slower, heavier. I'd patrolled this road countless times before. Never a hitch, never a sign of life besides the occasional fox or raccoon. But tonight felt different. The air smelled sharp, like wet earth mixed with something metallic, something that reminded me of old graves. I had just passed the turn for Cedar Hill Cemetery when I saw it. A coffin. In the middle of the road, not off to the side, not hidden in the fog, right in the center of my lane. I slammed on the brakes, tires squealing on wet asphalt, my heart leaping into my throat. My cruiser fishtailed slightly before coming to a stop, headlights illuminating the object fully. I stepped out, flashlight in hand. My boots squelched in the wet gravel by the roadside. The coffin was small, unassuming, simple wood, but what made my stomach drop wasn't the coffin itself. It was what was inside, my own sheriff's hat, folded perfectly, sitting at the center, the brim pressed flat, the badge gleaming in the pale beam of my flashlight. I backed up, nearly tripping on the slick asphalt. My mind raced. How could it be here? How could it? I forced myself to breathe. Professional, patrol, observations, facts. I scribbled in my notebook, hands trembling. Object. Coffin. Small wooden construction, positioned in roadway. Contents. Single sheriff's hat, neatly folded, matches current duty uniform. Condition. Clean, undamaged, badge intact. Location, Highway 37, roadside lane. Observation. Unexplained, potential threat to traffic. I circled the coffin slowly. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to drive away, call for backup. But curiosity, something darker than duty, kept me rooted. The hat looked normal, impossibly so, as if no one had touched it in months. And yet, it was here, in the middle of a deserted road. No footprints, no vehicle tracks, nothing to explain its presence. I knelt and reached out to touch the wood. Smooth, cold, solid. The air felt heavier around it, pressing into my chest, slowing my breath. I jerked my hand back. Something about it felt alive, watching, patient. I flipped the lid open fully. The hat rested neatly in the coffin, centered, almost ceremonious. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. My own name whispered through my mind, though no one was there. I wrote again, keeping professional. Interior. Coffin lid opened, reveals single object. Sheriff's hat, matches duty uniform, present and folded. Position centered. No evidence of external interference. Environmental factors, fog present, roadway empty, no visible tracks. I leaned closer. The road stretched into darkness ahead and behind. Fog swirled along the asphalt like smoke. And then I noticed something else. The faintest tremor in the hat. Not enough to move it, just a quiver, like something beneath it breathed slowly, intentionally. I stumbled back. My flashlight shook in my hand. My notebook was slipping, heart racing, sweat cooling against my skin. I could feel it pressing on me, the weight of that small coffin, the hat inside, the impossibility of it all. I tried to reason it out. A prank? Some stranger with a sense of humor? But no tire tracks, no footprints, no sign of anyone passing this road. Highway 37 at this hour was empty, abandoned. I'd seen it hundreds of times. And the hat, my hat, I couldn't explain it. Couldn't rationalize it, I wrote furiously. Potential hazard, object in roadway. No visible human intervention. Object appears deliberately placed. Contents personal equipment. Psychological impact, severe. Recommendation, remove object safely, continue monitoring. I lifted the coffin with effort, surprising myself with how light it was. The wood didn't creak, didn't resist. I placed it on the shoulder, away from the lane, my hands still trembling. My flashlight beam swept the fog. Nothing, not a figure, not a trace. Just the empty highway, wet and glimmering in the light, and then the whispers came. Faint at first, curling through the fog, carrying my name on every syllable. Soft, patient, insistent. Not angry, not commanding, just waiting. I froze. Notebook in one hand, flashlight in the other. The air seemed to hum with it. I wanted to drive away, to leave this road, leave the fog, leave the impossible coffin and the hat. But my legs didn't obey. My mind refused to let it go. I could feel the weight of it pressing against my chest, like the air itself was watching me, waiting to see what I would do. I breathed slowly, forcing my heart to steady. Patrol first, observation, documentation, facts. I jotted down more notes. Auditory phenomenon. Whispering voices detected, repeating name. Source, unknown, maybe environmental or psychological. Timing, coincides with observation of object. Subjective effect, anxiety, fear, disorientation. I glanced at the hat again. The badge gleamed under the flashlight. The wood of the coffin seemed darker than before. Alive. I had no words for it. I felt like a trespasser in a space that wasn't entirely mine. Something that shouldn't exist yet insisted on being recognized. I drove a few feet back, crouching behind the cruiser, flashlight swinging across the asphalt. The road was empty, silent, ordinary. But the memory of the coffin, of my hat folded so perfectly inside, pressed into my mind with every heartbeat. I forced myself to lift the coffin again, carried it to the edge of the ditch, set it down. I could feel eyes on me. Not human eyes, not living eyes, but awareness, patience. It was waiting for me to leave, to acknowledge it, to submit to it. I wrote the final notes in my log. Coffin moved to safe location. Highway cleared. Object and contents remain unexplained. Immediate threat none. Observation ongoing. Psychological impact high. Further monitoring recommended. I drove slowly down Highway 37, keeping my headlights high, scanning the fog for anything unusual. Nothing. The road was empty, quiet, normal. And yet I knew the hat was mine. I knew it had appeared without explanation, perfectly folded, inside that small coffin in the middle of the road. I knew the whispers would return, patient and insistent. I knew that Highway 37 wasn't just a road anymore. It was a place where the impossible waited. Even as daylight began to edge over the horizon, even as normalcy crept back into the world, I could feel it. The coffin, the hat, the weight of whatever force had placed it there. Watching, waiting, patient. I filed the report that morning. Careful, professional, documented, objective. No mention of whispers. No mention of the way my blood ran cold when I opened the lid. No mention of the presence that seemed alive in the fog. Only facts, time, location, observation, but the truth I cannot forget. And I know that one night, Highway 37 will call for me again. It started just after midnight. I was on the first patrol of my shift, cruising the stretch of Highway 37 that runs past the old Cedar woods. Fog had rolled in thick, clinging to the asphalt like a wet blanket. Streetlights glimmered through the mist, but the road was mostly dark. Quiet. Too quiet. I sipped my coffee, letting the engine hum beneath me, my eyes scanning the road. The kind of night where your imagination starts playing tricks, where every shadow seems too long, every tree too still. That's when it came, the static in my radio. At first, I thought it was just interference. Highway 37 isn't well traveled, and storms in the distance always mess with the frequency. But then, faintly, I heard it. A voice. Backup. Need backup. Please. I froze, gripping the wheel tighter. The voice was weak, distorted through the static. But it was there. Human. Desperate. And something about it made my stomach tighten. I flicked the volume up, listening more carefully. Who's calling? Unit 14, respond. My own voice sounded loud in the empty cruiser. The radio hissed. Then, clearer this time. Dalton, please. I stiffened. My name. Spoken slowly, stretched out through the static. My blood ran cold. Dalton, my predecessor, the sheriff who had vanished on this very highway years ago. Never found. No trace. I leaned back in my seat, mind racing. My first thought, someone's playing a prank. Maybe a hunter with a CB radio or some kid messing around. But the tone, the desperation, it wasn't human. Not in a prankish way. It was pleading, fearful, and personal. Dalton. Help. The name rolled over and over in my head, echoing with the static. My hand shook on the wheel. This shouldn't happen. It shouldn't be possible. The sheriff had been gone for decades. I checked the mirrors. The road behind me was empty, fog curling over the asphalt. I glanced down at the patrol log on my passenger seat, then back at the radio. My thumb hovered over the transmit button. Unit 14. Identify yourself. More static. A sigh through the crackle. And then, Dalton. I swallowed hard, trying to force calm. Professional, observation, documentation, nothing else. I scribbled quick notes. Time, 0.14. Location, Highway 37, mile marker 22. Event, radio signal, faint voice, repeating name. Subject unknown, possibly deceased officer? The road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly. Every few seconds, the voice repeated, wavering in pitch, almost like it was just out of reach. I felt a cold sweat bead at my hairline. I tried rationalizing. Signal interference, after effects of the storm, some distorted CB transmission, anything. But deep down, I knew this wasn't normal. I drove slower, keeping headlights high, scanning the trees. The mist seemed thicker now, heavier, pressing against the cruiser, curling in under the doors. The voice continued, repeating my name. Dalton, Dalton, Dalton. I gritted my teeth, gripping the wheel until my knuckles whitened. Professional. I needed facts, evidence, nothing else. I recorded it in my notebook. Auditory phenomenon. Persistent voice on radio. Repeating current officer's name. Signal intermittent. Static present. Psychological effect. High anxiety. Adrenaline elevated. Recommendation, immediate documentation and continuous monitoring. I kept driving, scanning the fog. Shadows shifted at the edge of the headlights. Shapes that could have been trees or could have been something else. I forced myself to blink, to breathe, to focus on the road. The voice grew louder, or maybe closer, in pitch and urgency. I couldn't tell. Dalton. Help! My pulse spiked. It wasn't a recording. It wasn't automated. It was alive, personal, and it was begging me, calling me by name. I reached for the radio, unsure if I wanted to respond. Who is this? Identify yourself! Static swallowed my words. Then a pause. Then, Dalton. I slammed the brakes, the cruiser skidding slightly on the damp asphalt. My heart was hammering. I glanced behind me. Empty. Not a single light, not a vehicle, not a soul. The voice returned, quiet this time, almost intimate, almost sad. Dalton. Don't leave. I pressed my hands to the wheel, breathing hard. Memories of my predecessor surfaced. The missing files, the cold trail, the abandoned cruiser found at the edge of the Cedar woods, and the whispers that locals claimed haunted the highway at night. All of it came rushing back, and now I was living it. I took careful notes, still trying to remain professional. Psychological impact. Severe. Perception of voice. Auditory direct intelligible. Repetition. Persistent. Emotional content. Fear. Pleading. Corroboration. None observed. Immediate action. Maintain patrol. Monitor frequency. Document all occurrences. I drove on, scanning both sides of the highway, my headlights cutting through the mist. Each curve in the road made the static rise, the voice closer, more insistent. I forced myself to focus on the instrument panel, the gauges, anything to ground myself, but the road was endless. Highway 37 stretched ahead like it wanted me to keep going, to chase the voice, to follow where it led. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel tighter, and then silence. The radio went dead. No static, no voice. Just the hum of the cruiser and the distant drip of water from the fog-drenched trees. My stomach tightened, my pulse still racing. I could feel it. Something had been there, just beyond the fog, just beyond my comprehension. Watching, waiting, patient. I made more notes. Signal terminated at 022, immediate auditory phenomena ceased. No visual confirmation of source. Psychological state, high alert, mild shock. Observation, ongoing. Recommendation, continue monitoring. Additional backup considered if repeated occurrence. I continued slowly along the road, flashlight cutting small arcs in the fog when I stopped to check roadside markers. No evidence of anyone. No disturbance. Nothing. Only the fog and the smell of wet earth and pine. I tried to shake it off, reasoning like a professional. Maybe it was the storm. Maybe it was a delayed recording of some old broadcast. Maybe it was fatigue and nerves. But the voice had said my name. My name? Dalton, not a call sign. Not Unit 14, not generic. My name. And that meant something. Or someone. I arrived at the turnoff near Cedar Hollow. My hands were still trembling, my eyes scanning every shadow. I paused, holding the brakes, listening. Only the hum of the cruiser, the drip of water from the trees, and the distant cry of a lone owl. I jotted the final notes. Observation complete for this patrol segment. Auditory phenomena uncorroborated by other units. Personal identity of source. Unknown, potential supernatural or residual psychological imprint. Continued surveillance and documentation required. I started the engine again, moving slowly toward the station, but the feeling stayed. The weight of it pressed in my chest, cold and patient. The knowledge that someone or something had called to me by name through a radio from decades past. Even now I can hear it, faint in the back of my mind. Dalton! Dalton! Don't leave. Highway 37 had begun its first patrol of the night with me, and I realized something I couldn't explain. Something I couldn't escape. The past doesn't stay buried, and sometimes it calls out in voices faint and broken, asking for help that may never come. I parked at the station, hands shaking, notebook clutched against my chest. I filed the report as objectively as I could, leaving out what couldn't be proven. Static, voice, my own name. I left it blank, professional. Facts only. But I know, and I know it isn't over. The night had a weight to it, thick like fog pressing against the cruiser's windows. Highway 37 stretched ahead, a ribbon of black asphalt disappearing into mist and shadows. My radio, which had been quiet for the past hour, crackled suddenly, a whisper slicing through the silence. At first I thought it was interference again. That storm had left the lines unstable, and I had learned to expect static at odd hours. But then the whispers grew clearer. Marshall. Come quick. I froze. The name wasn't mine. It was familiar. I frowned, trying to place it. Deputy. Help us. My pulse quickened. My fingers tightened around the wheel. Something about the tone, urgent, pleading, despairing, made the hair on the back of my neck rise. I leaned forward, turning the radio dial slightly. Static hissed, then another voice. Hanson! Can you hear us? The names hit me like a punch. Hanson, Marshall, McBride, all deputies long gone, buried in Cedar Hill Cemetery where I patrolled every night. Their deaths were old news. Records kept, plaques placed, stones etched with dates. They had never been forgotten by the town. But now, somehow, their voices were calling through this radio, into my ears, through the static. I gripped the wheel, heart hammering. The cruiser felt too heavy, as if the fog outside had turned solid. My mind tried to rationalize. Old recordings? A prank? Signal interference? But the cadence, the urgency, the way each name was drawn out, it was impossible to fake. Dalton, come to us. My own name, slipping through the static alongside theirs. My throat went dry. I pressed my hand against my chest, trying to slow my heartbeat. I scribbled in my notebook. Time, 0047, Highway 37, radio signal, intermittent, voices faint, intelligible. Names, Hanson, Marshall, McBride. Subject, unknown deceased personnel. Psychological effect, high. I tried to focus on the road, but the fog had thickened. Headlights pierced only a few yards ahead. Shadows of trees leaned in from both sides, bending strangely in the wind. I blinked, forcing myself to stay grounded, to remember the road, the cruiser, the asphalt beneath my tires. Static hummed again, faintly at first, then stronger. Dalton, help! Cedar Hill Cemetery. My patrol territory. My mind recoiled. Could it be a coincidence? No, not now. Not this late. Not with the names. With the way the voices trembled, almost human in their pleading. I switched the radio off for a moment, trying to clear my head, but the memory of the tones, the voices, clung to me. It wasn't just sound, it was presence. Alive, patient, waiting. I tried to explain it to myself logically. Perhaps some old recordings left on a forgotten frequency. Maybe someone was testing a new device, but the voices weren't generic, they knew me. They called my name. They knew my history. I took a deep breath. Professional. Patrol first. Document facts. Emotion later. Observation. Auditory phenomenon detected. Unverified source. Voices intelligible, familiar. Names correspond with historical personnel. Signal intermittent. Psychological stress significant. Recommendation, monitor frequency, document all events, maintain situational awareness. I drove on, headlights cutting narrow swaths through the fog. My eyes kept darting to the edges of the road, expecting movement, expecting something or someone to appear. Nothing, just trees, fog, and the empty road stretching ahead. Static returned, louder this time. Hanson. Dalton! McBride. The cadence shifted, overlapping like multiple voices layered together. Confusion, fear, desperation lacing each syllable. It pressed against my mind, soft but relentless, shaping the darkness around me. I could feel the ground beneath me, asphalt smooth, familiar, unbroken. But the air around me had changed. It was thick, charged, heavy with something I couldn't name. A memory of those long-buried deputies as if they lingered, waiting for recognition. I slowed the cruiser to a crawl, scanning the road edges. Every shadow felt like a potential witness. Every branch brushing the side of the car seemed to whisper my name, Dalton. Come quick! The repetition was maddening, a rhythm that seemed to press into my skull. I had to document. I scribbled furiously in my notebook. Phenomenon. Persistent. Voices overlapping, repeating deceased deputies' names. Direct address to Officer Dalton. Environmental conditions, fog, low visibility, empty highway. No physical evidence of presence. Potential threat, unknown. Action. Continue monitoring. Maintain safety precautions. I thought of stopping, stepping out, following the voices to their source. But reason kept me in the driver's seat. Too many stories of people disappearing along this stretch, drawn in by things no one could see. My predecessor, the long-dead sheriff, vanished somewhere in this same fog. And now the echoes of deputies past called to me. I gripped the wheel tighter. The voices didn't relent. They shifted, sounding closer, pressing through the static, calling my name alongside their own. Each syllable a tug, a pull toward the cemetery, toward the past. I forced myself to focus on the road. Professional. Facts. Documentation. Not the voices. Not the impossible. The fog began to thin slightly, but the voices persisted. Dalton. Cedar Hill. Help. Us. I could feel my chest tighten. My throat ached. My hands were clammy. The cruiser hummed beneath me, ordinary and grounding, But the road felt like it stretched on forever, curling back on itself, feeding me the voices in a loop. I jotted the final notes in my patrol log. Voices in radio static persist. Source unverified, maybe psychological or supernatural. Names correspond with deceased deputies interred at Cedar Hill Cemetery. Emotional response, extreme. Recommended actions, continued surveillance, maintain safety protocols, report occurrence to command. Even as the static faded and the radio fell silent again, I couldn't shake it. The memory of the names lingered, looping in my mind like a record stuck on the same line. Hanson, Marshall, McBride, Dalton. I reached the turnoff to Cedar Hill Cemetery, fog curling over the headstones like smoke. My headlights illuminated nothing unusual. Neatly trimmed grass, stone markers, familiar paths. But I could feel them there, lingering just beyond sight, waiting, watching. I sat in the cruiser for a long moment, notebook open on my lap, hands still shaking, trying to convince myself that it was only static, only interference, only imagination. But I knew better. Something reached through the years, through the earth, through the static and the fog. Something that knew names, that remembered the dead. And now it knew mine. Even as I drove back toward the station, the voices haunted me. Faint, almost imperceptible, threading through the hum of the engine, the hiss of tires on asphalt. Not entirely gone, waiting for me to return. Highway 37 was never the same again, and neither was I. The night had thickened, as if the fog itself had grown heavier, pressing against my cruiser, seeping under the doors, curling over my shoulders. Highway 37 stretched ahead, black and empty, dotted with the occasional glimmer of reflective signs and the dim gleam of distant headlights that never got closer. I had just shaken off the voices from last night, or so I thought. The static had faded, leaving my radio silent, but the memory of their names lingered, echoing in my head. Hanson, Marshall, McBride, Dalton. I took a deep breath, trying to focus on the road, the patrol, the mundane tasks. Professional, observation, documentation, facts. But the radio crackled again. Low, faint, almost timid. Dalton. Follow the coordinates. Mile 24, Cedar Hollow. I froze. The voice was unmistakable now, persistent, deliberate. Not random static, not interference. And my stomach dropped the instant I recognized it. Cedar Hollow Cemetery. That stretch of unmarked graves no one officially knew about. Graves whispered about, but never logged. I glanced at the GPS. Mile 24 was somewhere deep in the fog, past the old oak grove, just before the road bent sharply toward the creek. Normally nothing happened there. Just trees, stones, silence. And yet here I was being told to go there by voices that shouldn't exist. Dalton. Hurry, before it's too late. I gripped the wheel tighter. The fog outside pressed against the windshield like wet cloth. My hands trembled slightly. Professional, patrol, observation, documentation. I repeated the mantra in my head, over and over, trying to steady myself. I drove slowly, headlights cutting narrow beams through the mist. Every shadow at the edge of the road seemed to twitch. The trees leaned closer, their skeletal limbs brushing the fog. I could almost feel their presence, watching, waiting. The voices came again, layering this time, multiple names in a chorus through the static. Hanson, Dalton, McBride, Dalton? The words bounced around my skull, pulling me deeper into the fog, into the stretch of the road that led to the cemetery. My pulse pounded in rhythm with the whispers. My hands ached from gripping the wheel so tightly. I checked my rearview mirror. Nothing. No headlights. No other patrol. Just empty road. Fog swirling over asphalt like smoke over a grave. I forced myself to speak into the radio. Unit 14, I'm following. What coordinates? The static hissed, then clearer. 39, 47.6 north. 78, 24.1. Coordinates. Precise. And when I punched them into my GPS, my stomach twisted. They led straight to the unmarked graves. To the spot no map acknowledged, no records listed. I swallowed, forcing calm. Professional, patrol, observation, documentation. I made quick notes. Time, 0112. Highway 37, radio signal, repeating deceased deputies' voices. Coordinates provided, 39.476 N, 78.241 W. Destination, unmarked graves, Cedar Hollow. Immediate psychological impact, high. The fog thickened again as I approached the bend in the road. My headlights barely penetrated more than a few feet. I slowed to a crawl, muscles tense, every sense straining. The voice whispered again, "Dalton, stop here, watch." I parked on the shoulder, engine idling, flashlight in hand. My boots sank slightly into wet gravel as I stepped out. The air smelled of wet earth, decaying leaves, something metallic beneath it. I could feel the history here, the weight of decades pressed into the soil. The radio crackled once more. Step forward. 5 paces. You will see. I obeyed almost without thinking, counting steps into the fog. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. My flashlight beam caught something at the edge of visibility, a depression in the ground. I froze. The soil had been disturbed, recently, deeply, and yet no markers, no indication that anyone had been buried here in decades. I crouched down slowly, trying to steady my breath. The earth felt wrong, dense, compacted unnaturally. I traced the edge of the depression with a gloved hand. Loose soil fell away easily, but there was nothing visible inside. No coffin, no bones, just emptiness. And then the radio spoke again, almost mournfully. "Dalton, look closer. They are waiting." I shivered. The fog seemed to curl around me, thickening into shapes, shadows that twisted just beyond the flashlight beam. I could feel it, something beneath the soil, patient, waiting, aware of my presence. I made notes in my small patrol notebook, hands shaking. Observation, unmarked grave. Soil recently disturbed. No visible remains. Environmental conditions. Fog, wet earth, night. Radio signal persists. Auditory phenomenon, deceased deputies' voices. Psychological effect, extreme. A shiver ran down my spine. My flashlight trembled in my hand, reflecting off the wet leaves and slick soil. The air was alive with sound, the faint rustle of trees, a distant owl, and beneath it all, a low hum, almost a vibration through the earth itself. I stepped back, scanning the surrounding area. The coordinates were exact. I was standing over a grave, unmarked, unknown, and yet I could feel eyes beneath the soil, watching me, judging me, waiting. "Dalton, you must protect." The voice wavered, fading in and out, as if carried by the wind itself. I could barely make out the words, but the meaning pressed into me like a hand around my chest. Protect them. Guard them. Do not leave. I forced myself to remain professional. Observation first. Documentation second. Emotion. Later, I circled the grave, flashlight beam cutting through the fog, soil loose underfoot. My notebook filled with scrawled notes. Potential supernatural presence, unverified. Interaction, auditory commands via radio. Subjective perception, alive, aware, insistent. Risk assessment, unknown, potentially hazardous if disturbed. The fog shifted. I caught glimpses of shapes, long shadows, perhaps nothing, perhaps the figures of those long-buried deputies. My mind played tricks, but the instinct in my gut told me otherwise. Something was here, something waiting for recognition. I thought of turning back, reporting the coordinates, calling for backup, but the radio crackled again. "Dalton, they need you. Do not leave." The urgency in the voices was tangible, pressing into my skull. My pulse raced. My chest ached. I could feel the depression in the soil beneath my feet, the weight of decades of forgotten history, of unmarked deaths, of voices that had no business being heard tonight. I knelt again, flashlight closer to the ground. The soil shifted faintly, almost imperceptibly. I froze. My mind screamed at me to step back, but I couldn't. Curiosity, duty, fear, they held me rooted. The air smelled sharper now, metallic, like iron and wet leaves. My hands shook as I ran them over the edge of the depression. Something moved beneath my fingers, soft, almost like the soil was breathing. I recoiled, heart hammering. The radio whispered once more, softer now, patient, sorrowful. Dalton. Protect? Watch? Never forget. I backed away, chest heaving, flashlight swinging wildly over the foggy road. The depression remained, empty, silent now, but the sense of awareness lingered. Something had been beneath that soil. Something had felt me. Something had waited. I climbed back into the cruiser, notebook in hand, recording every detail, every sound, every heartbeat. Observation complete for coordinates. Unmarked graves confirmed. Auditory phenomena persistent. Soil movement detected. No physical remains visible. Psychological impact severe. Immediate action. Monitor and document. Maintain safety protocols. Report findings when possible. I drove slowly back to the main road, fog pressing in like a living thing. My hands were clammy, my breath shallow. The night had changed. Highway 37 had changed. And I knew, even as the fog lifted slightly and the headlights stretched further into the darkness, that the voices would return. The deputies were waiting. The graves were waiting. And the radio would never be silent for long again. I kept driving. The coordinates burned into my mind, the soil beneath my feet still alive in memory. My patrol log would be factual, professional, dry, objective. But in my head, in my chest, in my blood, I knew the truth. Highway 37 had secrets buried deeper than any record could hold. And now it had found me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my cruiser until dawn, staring out through the fog that never really lifted. Every so often, the radio would pop and hiss, and I'd flinch like I was waiting for it to speak again. It never did. Just that thin, empty static, whispering under the sound of my own breathing. By morning, the world felt colorless. The grass along Highway 37 looked gray. Even the sunlight, what little there was, seemed weak and wrong. I told myself I'd imagined it, the voices, the coordinates, the graves that weren't on any map. I even wrote up the report straight and clean, no mention of the radio or the dead deputies. Just routine patrol notes. That's what you do when you wear the badge. You document. You move on. But I couldn't move on. The voice from the radio, the last one before the static cut out, had sounded almost like me. I'd convinced myself it was my mind playing tricks, that I'd been hearing my own echo or something mechanical. But when I replayed the recording from my dash cam later that day, I heard it again. Dalton. Just that. My name. Drawn out, soft, like someone whispering it through a mouthful of dirt. I paused the audio. My hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the table to steady them. I don't scare easily. I've seen wrecks on this highway that could make a man quit the force altogether. But that voice, it wasn't just sound. It carried weight, sadness, recognition. And it sounded exactly like me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe feedback, maybe interference, maybe one of the dispatch recordings got mixed in somehow. But then the second playback cut through all my logic. Dalton, help me. Down here. I slammed my laptop shut. I sat there for a long time, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. The same uniform, same tired eyes, same man. But the voice I heard, it felt like a warning from somewhere I shouldn't be hearing anything from. That night, I went back to the same stretch of road. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just drove. The kind of silence that hangs over places like that, it's heavy. Even the crickets go quiet, like they're afraid of being heard. By the time I reached mile 24, the fog was already thick again. I left the headlights on low beam and let the cruiser idle. The radio was silent. Completely dead. I picked up the mic anyway. Dispatch, this is Unit 14, checking signal. Do you copy? Static. Repeat, this is Unit 14. Dispatch, you copy? Nothing. Then, a faint crackle. A breath, like someone close to the mic. Dalton! The voice was weaker this time, like it was straining. I felt my throat tighten. My own voice echoed back through the static, warped, distorted, pleading. Dalton, help me! Down here! I stared at the radio, the little red light blinking like a heartbeat. Who is this? I asked. But even as I said it, I knew. It was me. Same tone. Same inflection. Even the way I breathed between words. It was mine. "Where are you?" I said quietly. "What do you mean down there?" The static swelled, and under it, faintly, I could hear something, like dirt shifting, like a hand brushing against wood. Then a muffled sound, a voice again, weaker, buried, under. The transmission cut. The fog outside pulsed with the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I didn't think. I just grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The air was colder now. Wet, heavy, the kind of cold that crawls under your skin. I could see my breath drift out and fade into the mist. I walked toward the trees, toward the place where the coordinates had led me before. The ground felt soft under my boots. I called out, voice shaking, "Hello? Anyone there?" Only the wind answered, low and hollow through the branches. I turned on the radio on my belt, still static. Then, faintly, like a whisper caught between stations. Here. It was barely audible, but it came from ahead, deeper into the fog. I followed the sound until I reached the edge of the clearing, the same clearing from before. The one with the disturbed soil. The one with no markers. The flashlight beam trembled across the dirt. And then I heard it again, muffled, below me, 3 knocks. I froze. Not loud, not desperate. Just slow, deliberate knocks from beneath the ground. I dropped to my knees, pressing my ear to the soil. My heart thudded so hard I could barely hear. But then, another knock. Then another. Then my name, faint, buried in the dirt. "Dalton!" I staggered back. The air felt thick, almost liquid. My flashlight flickered. I turned toward my cruiser, but the radio inside had come alive on its own. "Dalton, you're down here." The voice was clearer now, less distorted. I could hear breath. I could hear the scrape of fingernails against wood. I grabbed the mic. "Who is this?" "Identify yourself." Silence. Then almost whispering, "I said that. I said those words. I froze. I said them," the voice continued. "On the night I disappeared." My breath caught in my throat. I remembered the transmission logs, the one I'd dismissed as corrupted audio. A deputy from 30 years ago, John Dalton. Sheriff before me, my grandfather. I dropped the mic. My hands felt numb. He'd gone missing on Highway 37 in 1989. They'd found his cruiser at the same bend, lights still on, driver's side door open. No body, just the radio still hissing static. I took a step back toward the car. The voice grew louder. "Dalton, help me. The dirt's so heavy." I could feel my chest tightening. I didn't want to believe it, but everything inside me screamed that it was real. I turned toward the grave again, the disturbed soil. The flashlight beam caught something. A flicker of metal half buried in the dirt. I reached for it. My fingers brushed against cold metal. A badge. I pulled it free. Sheriff's badge. Worn. Rusted. My grandfather's name still faintly etched on it. John Dalton. The radio behind me hissed louder. "Dalton. You found me." My knees went weak. The ground seemed to shift beneath me. I dropped the badge. Then another sound. The faint scrape of wood like something moving below the dirt. Dalton. It wasn't just one voice now. There were others. Fainter. Layered beneath his. Dozens. Maybe more. All whispering. All saying my name. Dalton. Dalton. Down here. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots, flashlight beam jerking wildly. My cruiser was still idling, headlights glowing through the fog. The radio inside pulsed with voices, too many to count, all overlapping, all calling. I slammed the door shut and threw the car into reverse, spinning gravel behind me. The voices didn't stop. They rose, louder, through the speakers, through the static, and then my own voice cut through them all. "Dalton, help me." I hit the brakes. It wasn't coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from below. I looked down. The floor of the cruiser, vibrating slightly, dust shifting along the edges of the mat. I leaned closer, hand trembling. The voice came again, directly beneath me, muffled through metal. "Dalton, please," my own voice, not recorded, not delayed. Alive. The air inside the cruiser felt thick and hot. I could barely breathe. I gripped the wheel and pressed the gas, tearing away from that stretch of highway. The radio died. The static vanished. But I could still hear it. Even now, when I drive that road, I keep the radio off. I keep my eyes on the asphalt and try not to think about the graves that aren't on any map. Sometimes, late at night when the fog rolls in just right, I hear it again, soft, patient, rising from somewhere deep below the tires, my own voice, calling my name, Dalton. And every time it happens, I wonder how many of us are still driving that road, long after we've already been buried. They told me about the oath on my first week as sheriff. Not the kind you take in a courthouse or in front of a flag. No, this one was whispered, passed down between men who've worn the badge long enough to see what the night really looks like out on Highway 37. The words were always the same. Never stay past 3:33 a.m. On cemetery patrol. The older deputy said it half joking, like it was just one of those local legends people pass around to scare the rookies. But there was something in their tone that didn't sound like a joke. A kind of quiet warning. I laughed it off back then. Said, I'd seen enough bodies in ditches and drunk wrecks on the shoulder that a time on the clock wasn't going to scare me, but they didn't laugh back. One of them, Deputy Moore, just looked down at his coffee and said, "It ain't about being scared. It's about not being called." I didn't understand what that meant. Not yet. That was years ago. Now, whenever I drive that stretch of road, the fog thick as milk and the radio whispering static, I think about that oath. I think about how every man before me who took this job either quit, drank himself to ruin, or disappeared, and every one of them worked the same route. The cemetery patrol at Cedar Hill. I started the shift at midnight like always. The county had been quiet lately, too quiet. I told myself I liked the silence, but truth is, silence out here doesn't feel empty. It feels crowded, like something's listening. The cruiser clock read 12:07 when I turned onto the access road. The graveyard sits at the end of an old dirt path, half-eaten by roots and time. Locals don't come out here after dark, not even kids. The gates stay locked. Always have, but we patrol it anyway. Every night. Every sheriff. It's tradition. The headlights caught on the rusted gate. The letters Cedar Hill Cemetery hanging crooked like teeth. I rolled the window down, breathed in the damp air, and tried not to think about how still it was. No wind, no insects, not even the creak of the gate chain. Just my engine idling like a heartbeat. I radioed in. Unit 14, beginning patrol of Cedar Hill perimeter. No response. Just static. I adjusted the dial, frowned, tried again. Dispatch, you copy? Still nothing. I checked my watch. 12:14. Plenty of time before 3:33. The old part of the cemetery is the worst. The graves tilt, sunken and crooked, stones half swallowed by weeds. I walked that section first, flashlight beam cutting through the mist. Every step sounded too loud. The beam slid across the names: Turner, Mallory, Griggs, families that hadn't lived around here in decades. I'd seen their records before. Whole bloodlines gone. When I reached the children's section, I stopped. You always stop there. Every sheriff does. It's not written anywhere, but it's part of the job. You check the stones. You read the names. You listen. I don't know why. Maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's tradition. Maybe it's just what happens when too many men spend too many nights surrounded by the dead. By 1:30, I'd finished the perimeter and sat back in the cruiser, writing up my report. The fog outside pressed against the windows like it was trying to look in. I switched on the defroster, leaned back, and rubbed my eyes. That's when I saw the lights. Lanterns. Faint. Moving slowly between the trees on the north end of the cemetery. At first, I thought maybe someone had broken in. Teenagers, maybe. Or grave robbers. I grabbed my flashlight again and stepped out. The night swallowed me whole. The air felt heavy, cold enough to bite. "Sheriff's Department," I called out. "Who's there?" The lanterns flickered once, and then went out. I waited. Nothing. The wind picked up suddenly, whispering through the branches. I thought I heard something under it, soft, rhythmic, like humming. But the harder I listened, the quieter it got. I checked my watch again. 2:02. Something about the way the fog moved didn't feel right. It didn't drift. It pulled, like it was being drawn toward the center of the graveyard. That's when I heard the voice. "Sheriff." It wasn't loud. Just enough to freeze me mid-step. "Who's out there?" I said. My voice didn't sound like mine anymore. It came out smaller. Silence. Then closer. "You're early." I swept the flashlight across the rows of stones. Nothing. Just pale mist curling between them. "Show yourself," I shouted. And then I heard it. A whisper right behind me. "Don't stay past 333. I spun around so fast I nearly slipped on the wet grass. No one there. Only the beam of my light hitting a crooked headstone with the name worn away. I backed toward the cruiser, every instinct screaming at me to leave. But that's not what sheriffs do. We document. We stay. I climbed back inside, locked the doors, and started the engine. My hands were shaking. I radioed dispatch again. "Unit 14 requesting confirmation. Does anyone copy?" For a long moment, just static. Then faintly, "Go home, Sheriff." I froze. It wasn't dispatch. The voice was male, old, calm. I swallowed hard. "Who is this?" The radio crackled, and then it was gone. My watch read 3:29. That number hit me harder than it should have. 4 minutes. 4 minutes until the time the old sheriffs warned about. I told myself to leave, just go. But something in me, the same stubborn streak that's kept me on this job longer than I probably should have stayed, wanted to see. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe proof, maybe peace of mind, maybe the truth behind the oath, so I stayed. 30, the seconds crawled. The fog outside thickened. The headlights dimmed, pulsing like a dying heart. 32. I held my breath. The world felt like it was waiting. Then, every radio in the cruiser turned on at once. Not just mine. The dash radio, the old CB under the seat, even the one I'd pulled from a wrecked unit years ago. All of them blaring with static, and underneath it, voices. Dozens of them. Layered. Whispering in perfect unison. You stayed. The sound filled the car, pressing into my skull, under my skin. I covered my ears, but it didn't stop. It was inside me. You stayed. I screamed into the mic. "Who are you?" Then silence. One last voice came through. Soft. Broken. "You took the oath." The clock flipped. 33 a.m. and everything went dark. Not just the lights, the air itself. The fog disappeared. The sound, the cold, all of it gone. Just blackness like the whole world blinked out. Then I heard it, knocking, 3 slow knocks on the driver's side window. I turned my head. My breath caught. Outside, standing in the beam of my dying headlights, was a man in uniform. Sheriff's hat. Badge dull with age. His skin gray, lips pale. He smiled. Then he lifted his hand. The same hand that had just knocked, and pressed it against the glass. My own hand. My face. Older. Dead. I blinked, and he was gone. The world came rushing back. The fog. The cold, the sound of my engine sputtering. The clock now read 3:34. I drove out of there so fast I nearly tore the bumper off on the gate. I didn't write the report that night. Didn't radio it in. I just drove until the sun came up. Until the world looked real again. And the next day, when I came into the office, I saw something I'll never forget. Pinned to the bulletin board was a black and white photo. Old, faded. A sheriff's department group picture from 1949. All the old sheriffs lined up in front of the station, smiling, proud. And there, near the middle, was the man I'd seen in the fog. Same face, same eyes, same badge. Underneath, in neat handwriting, it said, Sheriff Thomas Dalton, died on duty, 3:33 a.m. I looked closer. The man standing right beside him had my face. The caption below was blurred, but I could still make out one word. Missing. I didn't take the oath after that, but I never had to. Every night I patrol Highway 37. I still see that time on the clock, 3:33, and feel my pulse slow down just a little. And in the quiet static of the radio, sometimes I swear I hear a whisper, low and patient. Don't stay past it, this time. You ever had a night that just wouldn't end? I'm not talking about a long shift or an all-nighter. I mean a night that refuses to let you go. Like time itself gets stuck, dragging you through the same dark minute over and over again until you start to lose track of who you are. That's what happened to me on Highway 37. It was about a week after that first incident at Cedar Hill, the one I've tried real hard to forget. I told myself I imagined it. That the fog, the radio, the man outside my window, it was just fatigue. That's what I told myself. But part of me knew better. Still, I wasn't ready to believe in curses or ghost stories. I was a sheriff. I dealt in facts, in things I could hold or arrest. And if I was going to keep this job, I had to prove, to myself, mostly, that what happened that night wasn't real. So I broke the oath, voluntarily. I told dispatch I'd cover the late shift, the one that stretches to 4 a.m. Nobody argued. Nobody ever volunteers for the cemetery route, so they handed it off to me quick, almost like they wanted me gone for the night. I packed extra coffee, a flashlight, and my recorder. If something weird happened, I'd have proof. The drive out was calm. The road was empty, the stars faint through a film of low clouds. I kept the radio low, just static whispering behind the hum of the tires. The air felt heavy, like the kind of night where sound doesn't travel right. When I reached Cedar Hill, I checked my watch. 12:47 a.m. I told myself I'd stay until at least 3:45. That'd be 12 minutes past the cursed time. Enough to prove nothing happened. Enough to sleep easy again. The gate looked the same as before. Rusted, crooked, half swallowed by fog. My headlights caught something new, though. A shape. At first I thought it was trash. Then I realized it was flowers. Fresh flowers, laid neatly in front of the gate, tied with a red ribbon. The petals were wet, like they'd just been set down. No footprints around them, no tire marks, nothing. I crouched down, touched the ribbon. It was warm. That didn't make sense. I backed away, got in the cruiser, and started my patrol. For the first hour, nothing happened. I drove the loop around the cemetery, headlights cutting through the fog. My dashboard clock ticked slow, steady. 1:15, 1:46, 2:09. Each time I checked, I felt a little more confident, until I realized something. The fog wasn't moving, not in the way fog usually does. It wasn't drifting, it was turning. Like a slow, circular current swirling around the car, I rolled down the window and stuck my hand out. The air was thick, almost sticky. I could barely see the trees anymore. Then, the radio popped. A burst of static, sharp enough to make me flinch. Dispatch, this is Unit 14, do you copy? Static. I tried again. Dispatch, come in. Nothing. I turned the dial and the static shifted. Higher, then lower, like someone breathing through the speaker. Then a faint voice buried in the noise. You shouldn't have come back. I froze. I looked at the clock. 2:33, still an hour to go. I gripped the steering wheel, told myself it was a prank. Maybe someone piggybacking on the radio frequency. But then the voice spoke. Again, time runs different here. And then, silence. That's when I noticed the coffee I'd poured it not even 20 minutes earlier, but the cup was cold, ice cold. Steam gone. The car clock still said 2:33. I tapped the faceplate. Nothing. I pulled out my phone to check the time. 33, I waited. Watched the numbers. They didn't move. That's when my chest went tight. You ever feel like the air around you suddenly knows you're there? Like it's watching? That's what it felt like. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was aware. I turned the key, but the engine didn't start. Just the faint click of a dead battery. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the alternative was losing it completely. All right, I said out loud. All right, you win. I'll walk. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped out, and started toward the gate. The fog swallowed me quick. Every footstep felt like it landed half a second late, like sound was lagging behind me. When I reached the gate, I noticed something strange. The flowers were gone, just gone. I crouched down, brushed the dirt with my hand. Nothing, no petals, no ribbon. Not even the mark where they'd been. My flashlight flickered, and then I heard it. Music. Faint, scratchy, like an old record player from far away. A lullaby. It was coming from inside the cemetery. I climbed over the gate. I don't know why. Every part of me was screaming to go back, but my legs kept moving. The fog thinned as I went deeper. The graves looked different, taller, cleaner. Names I didn't recognize. One read Sheriff Thomas Dalton, 1949. Next to it, another, Sheriff Allen Wren, 1963, and beside that, a third stone, Sheriff Daniel Cole, 1988, all lined up perfectly. My breath caught when I saw the fourth headstone. It was blank, smooth, fresh, waiting. I stumbled back, dropped the flashlight. The beam rolled across the ground and stopped on something in the dirt. A red ribbon, same one from the flowers. Only this time it was tied around a small wooden cross. My name was carved into it, Sheriff Mark Halley. That's when the world shifted. The fog snapped back like a curtain being pulled, and suddenly I was standing in front of the cruiser again. The lights were off. The air was still. I looked at the clock, 1:33. Still, I blinked, rubbed my eyes. Then I heard tapping, soft, steady, against the passenger window. I turned. There was someone sitting inside the cruiser. It was me. Same uniform, same face. But older, paler, eyes sunken. He looked right at me and said, "It's not 2:33, it's always 2:33. I stumbled back, heart pounding. The headlights flicked on, blinding me. And when I looked again, the seat was empty. The radio crackled. A voice, mine again, whispered, "Longest shift of your life, Sheriff." I don't remember getting back in the car. I just remember driving fast, with the fog chasing me like a living thing. The road stretched on forever, mile after mile, no turns, no landmarks. I thought maybe I'd died. Maybe that's what this was, but then the horizon cracked open. Morning light spilled across the road, and just like that, time started again. The clock jumped from 2:33 to 6:01 in one blink. I was shaking. My knuckles were white on the wheel. When I finally reached the station, no one said a word. They just looked at me like they'd seen this before. One of the old deputies, Moore, walked over, handed me a cup of coffee. He didn't ask what happened. He just said, "Now you understand why we don't stay late." I wanted to argue. I wanted to demand answers. But all I could do was nod. That night, I checked my phone logs, my watch, even my cruiser dash cam. Every device had frozen at 2:33 for 4 hours. I called the county tech to review the footage. He said the files were corrupted. Nothing recorded. Just a still image of the gate and a faint humming sound. When he played it back, the humming got louder, and then, in the middle of it, my voice said, clear as day, "Still on patrol." But I wasn't. I was sitting right there in the office. That was a month ago. Now, every time I close my eyes, I still see that clock. 2:33. Still ticking in my head, even when the world says it's morning. The longest shift never really ended. It just keeps looping. And sometimes, when I drive that stretch of Highway 37, the radio comes alive on its own. Static first. Then my voice. Unit 14, beginning patrol of Cedar Hill perimeter. And I swear, somewhere out there in the fog, I'm still driving that route, still stuck at 2:33, still trying to finish a shift that'll never end. I used to think the hardest part of this job was loneliness. The empty nights, the quiet highways, the hum of the cruiser that starts to sound like your own heartbeat. You get used to the silence out here until the silence starts to get used to you. That was before I learned what Highway 37 really was. Before I understood that nobody ever quits patrol out there. They just stay, even after they shouldn't. It had been 2 nights since what I call the long shift. 2 nights since time stopped at 2:33 a.m., since I'd seen myself sitting in the cruiser. I didn't sleep much after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear the soft buzz of the radio and that faint voice saying, "Still on patrol." I told myself I'd never go back out there. Never again. But that's the thing about Highway 37. It doesn't wait for you to decide. It finds you. It started small. I was back at the station, late evening, just finishing paperwork. The rest of the department had gone home hours ago. The overhead lights flickered once, then steadied. I brushed it off, then my radio hissed. At first, I thought it was picking up static from another county, but the voice came through clear, like someone was right beside me. Unit 14, check in. I froze. That was my unit number, but I hadn't called it in. Unit 14, you on patrol? The voice sounded familiar. Deep, measured, old. I picked up the mic. This is Sheriff Halley. Who is this? No answer. Just a long, dragging breath. Then, watch your post. The radio went dead. That night, I dreamed I was back on Highway 37, except this time, it wasn't empty. There were lanterns all along the road, glowing soft yellow through the fog. Figures stood beside each one, still straight-backed like guards. I couldn't see their faces, but I recognized their uniforms. All sheriffs, all in perfect formation, and at the center of them all was me, my hand gripping a lantern, my eyes blank. When I woke up, my pillow was wet with sweat. My clock said 3:33 a.m. The next morning, I found a note on my desk. Typed, unsigned, return to post. They're waiting. I laughed when I read it. A nervous kind of laugh, the kind that comes out wrong. I figured someone in the department was screwing with me. I tore it up, tossed it in the trash. By sunset, I'd convinced myself that's all it was, a prank. But as I got into my car, I noticed something strange. The cruiser was gone. No record of it being checked out. No one had seen it since my last shift. And yet, when I turned the key in my personal truck, the radio in the dashboard came to life. Same channel, same tone. Unit 14, check-in. My throat went dry. I didn't reply this time, but my headlights flickered on by themselves, pointing straight toward the East Road, the one that led to the cemetery. I wish I could say I didn't drive there. I wish I could say I turned around, went home, burned the badge. But that's not what happened. The truth is, I was tired. Tired of pretending I didn't feel it. That pull, the one that starts in your chest and drags you back to where it all began. So I drove, and as soon as I turned onto Highway 37, the air changed. The fog was back, curling low, almost glowing under the moonlight. My dashboard clock flickered and then, of course, froze at 2:33. Only this time I didn't fight it. I let it happen. The road ahead shimmered, stretching longer than it should have. Trees leaned in like they were listening. Then, in the distance, I saw light, a line of lanterns, faint and wavering. They were moving. A procession, just like the one from before. The same slow march down the shoulder of the road. But this time, I noticed something new. Each figure carried something. Not flowers, not tools. Badges, sheriff badges, nailed to pieces of wood, and they glinted when they passed through the beam of my headlights, like metal catching fire. I rolled down my window. "Hey!" I shouted. The line stopped. Every head turned toward me. My heart nearly stopped because I recognized their faces. Sheriff Dalton, Sheriff Wren, Sheriff Cole. Their portraits were still hanging in the station hallway, the last 3 to die on duty. They looked peaceful. Their mouths moved together, whispering something I couldn't make out. I stepped out of the truck, flashlight trembling in my hand. "Where's my cruiser?" I called out. Dalton stepped forward. His voice was barely more than a breath. "You brought it back." What? He pointed past me, down the road. I turned, and there it was, my cruiser. Parked on the shoulder, headlights dim, but it wasn't alone. 2 other cars sat beside it. Old models, half buried in dirt, badges still shining on their doors. I walked closer. My reflection rippled in the glass. The back seat light was on, and sitting there, clear as day, was a lantern, lit burning bright. I didn't want to touch it. I swear I didn't. But my hands moved on their own. The metal was warm, too warm, and the flame inside didn't flicker, not even when the wind picked up. And then I heard them again. The old sheriffs. "Watch your post," they said in unison. "It's your turn now." I tried to back away, but the road behind me was gone. Just fog, the kind that looks thick enough to breathe in. I looked down, and for a split second, I wasn't standing on asphalt anymore. It was dirt, packed tight, the kind that belongs to a graveyard. Rows of tombstones stretched out around me, each with a badge nailed to it. Fresh nails, new shine, and at the far end, a blank stone waited. The same one from before, the same one with my name already carved halfway through. I dropped the lantern and ran. But no matter how far I went, I never reached the gate. The fog bent the road. The trees leaned the wrong way, and somewhere in that thick, choking silence I started to hear breathing, my own, echoing from all directions. I don't remember how long I was out there. Could have been minutes, could have been years. But when I finally stopped, I was standing in front of the old watchtower on the cemetery's edge. I'd seen it 100 times, but I'd never gone inside. The door was open now. Lantern light spilled out from within, and standing at the top of the stairs was me, the other me, the one from the cruiser. He held the same lantern, same badge. And when he spoke, his voice was calm. "We don't leave, Mark. We watch." I shook my head. No, this isn't real." He smiled, almost kind. "It's more real than anything else. Look around." And I did. The other sheriffs stood in a wide circle around the tower. Dalton, Wren, Cole, all holding lanterns. Their eyes were hollow, but they weren't angry. They were patient, waiting. My other self stepped closer, handing me the lantern. "Every sheriff takes the oath," he said softly. "But not all of them understand what it means." The flame inside the lantern flickered, and for a heartbeat I saw something in it. Bodies, lined up in rows, each one wearing a badge, and somewhere in the middle, me. Still, part of me wanted to take it, to stop fighting, to belong. I don't remember what happened after that. The next thing I knew, the sun was rising, and I was standing outside the cemetery gate. My cruiser parked beside me. The clock read 6:01. The radio was silent, but on the passenger seat sat a lantern, cold now, empty. When I got back to the station, the old deputy, Moore, looked up at me like he'd already seen the ending. He didn't say a word, just pointed to the wall of framed photos. I froze. There, next to Dalton and Wren and Cole, was me, that same uniform, same tired smile. The plaque beneath read, "Sheriff Mark Halley, end of watch 2:33 a.m. I don't know who's been wearing my face since then, but every time I drive down Highway 37, I see the lanterns glowing in the distance, and sometimes I see another one join the line. Another light, another sheriff, another watchman. That's the truth about Highway 37. It doesn't bury its dead, it just recruits them. And somewhere out there in the fog, I'm still standing guard, lantern in hand, watching the road that never ends.